What was the most epic, I rest my case moment that a lawyer got to dish out? I was on the losing end of this one. I was representing a pro bono defendant who was attempting to regain custody of her children. The family division attorney was laying out his case to the judge for why my client wasn't ready, and his final point was that my client had refused emotional counseling to avoid violent fits of rage that she had inflicted on her children. On cue, my client jumps up screaming, "Frick you, judge lady, you stupid frickin' C-word! Frick y'all for taking my frickin' kids, you frickin' C-words!" I just caught the opposing attorney's smirk of satisfaction as I got up to usher my client out of the courtroom. I was prosecuting some kid. He had an antisocial behavior order, which meant that he was not supposed to go to a certain street. He'd pled not guilty on the basis that he hadn't been there. I opened my cross-examination by holding up a map and pointing at the street. I said to him, "You went here, didn't you?" He said, "Yes." In England, we don't say, "I rest my case." Instead, I looked up at the bench and said, "No further questions," and sat down. It might not seem epic, but I got the defendant to admit the offense with one question. That never happens. Opposing counsel decided that I'd coached my witness and gave him lines to repeat, that he was lying. Short version is that he asked the witness if he spoke to me before he testified. The witness said that he had spoken to me. The attorney looked like he thought he had me. The attorney asked the witness what I told him and what instructions I gave him. Witness looked him dead in the eye and said, "The first thing he told me was to tell the truth no matter what. He said the lawyer is never the one who goes to jail, that he isn't going to go to jail for me, and if I lie, I'm on my own." The attorney looked like someone had taken the air out of him. Everyone in the courtroom simultaneously looked at me. Only time I've ever smirked or laughed in court. I wanted to put my feet up on the table like I was Vincent LaGuardia Gambini, hands behind my head, and say, "I'm done with this guy." Yeah, it's nice to know that people who practice law are still prone to the same bouts of being confidently wrong that you see in other professions. They just get paid more for it. I had a trial against a guy who was self-representing, and he was constantly asking my client about conversations she had had with me. First of all, no, I'm not coaching her to lie, and second of all, there's a thing called privilege, which means the things we discuss aren't compellable. It was an exhausting trial. Needless to say, he was ordered to pay about $1 million more than he actually owed. Not a case-winning moment, but a motion-winning one for sure. Think of cases like a big conflict, with motion hearings as little conflicts. Opposing attorney was insisting that Rule A meant that they could do X. I tried multiple times to point out that Rule A literally didn't say that. During the hearing, the judge reached behind them, grabbed their rules of civil procedure, basically dictionary of rules, placed it in front of the other attorney and said, "Show me where Rule A says X." The other attorney didn't take the hint, read the rules out loud for a brutal 5 minutes, and gave the book back. I said, "Judge, I have nothing to add." It was pretty fun. When I was in law school, I had to argue a case for an exam. I was the last in my class to go, so there wasn't anyone arguing against me. I opened with a motion to dismiss since opposing had failed to show up. The judge grading me chuckled and said, "Touché, counsel." I still had to go forward, but we got off on the right foot and I ended up with an A. Corporate lawyer, so I don't have cases to rest, but once opposing counsel was forcefully insisting that it was ridiculous for me to expect a certain provision in a contract we were negotiating, and I pointed out that this provision was standard in his own firm's contract forms, as I knew from several prior transactions I'd worked on across from them. Pretty exciting stuff. He took it in stride and said jokingly, "Well, of course it's fine when we ask for it." I represented a company that was sued for breach of contract by a former independent contractor. The guy was basically alleging that my client wasn't paying him correctly in accordance with the contract. During his deposition, the guy admits that he'd never reviewed any documents to make sure his allegations were true, never reviewed his complaint before filing it to make sure the allegations in it were true, and had no idea whether or not my client actually failed to pay him in accordance with the contract. Basically, he tells me that he was suing my client because he didn't think their agreement was fair, even though he agreed to the terms when he signed the contract. The kicker is that he admitted that he owed my client money. At arbitration, he tries to flip his story and started giving testimony that's the exact opposite of his deposition, so I whip out his transcript and undermine his testimony bit by bit. Needless to say, I won that case. Defendant in a bench trial for a speeding ticket said he couldn't possibly go as fast as the officer clocked him. He knew this because he videotaped himself accelerating from full stop to the location where the officer sat. His experiment showed his vehicle could only get to 55 miles per hour and not the 67 he was clocked at. The ADA then moved to have another speeding ticket issued because the actual posted speed limit was 50 miles per hour. 5 miles per hour over is probably just a fine and a few points. 17 over is possibly reckless driving depending on the officer's discretion, so I don't think he was being too dumb. Oh, this was during sentencing. Mr. Defendant, they were a local boss gang, you stated you are not and have never been in a gang. That's correct. Do you have any tattoos? Yeah, I have a tiger on my calf and one on my chest that says GD for life. And what does GD stand for? Gangster Disciples, but I mean, no further questions, Your Honor. Complaining witness accused my client of stalking. Said she told him numerous times that she wanted nothing to do with him. My client claimed they were dating, but whenever she got mad at him, she'd call the cops and say he was stalking her. On the stand, she had testified that she had never dated him, never invited him into her home, wanted nothing to do with him. She presented a photo on her phone of him sitting on her porch to prove that he'd come to her property. I asked the judge's permission to look at the photos before and after the porch photo for context. Girl had dozens of photos of the guy who was clearly her boyfriend. I showed her one such picture. So this is Mr. So-and-so, right? Yes. In this photo, he's on a bed. Yes. This bed is yours? Yes. This bed is in your bedroom? Yes. You took this photo of him? Yes. He's smiling in this photo, right? Yes. And in this photo, he's wearing your brassiere? Yes. No further questions, Your Honor. My sister got T-boned by a car, causing a concussion when I was younger. Long story short, we were in court with the judge who asked the driver if he'd ever sped before. No, Your Honor, I never speed, was his reply. The judge asked him a couple more times if he was sure if he'd never sped, ever. The driver was adamant that he never sped and never had before. A few minutes later, my sister's lawyer gave the judge some paperwork. The judge read it and said to the driver, "It seems that you have some past driving violations. Can you tell me what they're for?" Long silence and stupid face followed by, "Speeding, Your Honor." The driver had to pay medical bills for my sister. It either takes a man with a complete lack of faith in the legal system or an absolute moron to go in with that much of a bald-faced lie and think he could just walk himself out of trouble that way. I was in traffic court one time and saw a lawyer straight up murder a cop with his words. The cop had previously testified that the weather on the night of the traffic stop was heavy rain and winds, so strong that the defendant could only open his window 3 inches, and that the car had stopped in an area with very little shoulder, forcing the cop to approach from the passenger side and not the driver's side. The cop had then testified that he smelled a strong smell of alcohol on the defendant's breath. When the defense lawyer got up, he repeated what the cop had said almost verbatim and asked how he could have possibly smelled alcohol on the breath of someone on the other side of the car, through a 3-inch crack in the window on a night with pouring rain and strong winds. The cop sort of opened and shut his mouth a few times, squirmed around in his seat and said, "That's just what I always write in my log to remind me that it was a DUI stop." The judge threw the case out. No motion to dismiss needed. Then he took a break and called the traffic prosecutor and the cop into his office. I'm guessing it wasn't for a nice spot of tea and some scones. I'm relatively junior, so I'm hoping to beat this one day. I defend professionals and brought a motion to dismiss case on the basis that the plaintiff couldn't prove my client was negligent as she had not served the required expert evidence. As opposing counsel and I waited for our motion to be heard, we were sitting in the courtroom. The judge, who I didn't know and who hadn't read our materials, wanted to talk to the parties of a short trial, which was to be heard after our motion was argued. The matter was also a professional negligence matter and the plaintiffs had no expert support. The judge then spent 10 minutes explaining that he'd practiced in professional negligence for many years and was well versed in the evidentiary requirements to prove the elements of professional negligence. In fact, he said, "I very rarely use the word impossible in this courtroom, but it is impossible for you to be successful without expert evidence." Our matter was then called, and I revelled in explaining to the judge that he was about to hear a motion to dismiss a professional negligence case on the basis that the client had no expert evidence. I won. I do mostly solicitor work, so if I'm doing my job right, I don't get a whole bunch of these kinds of moments. That being said, I had a long-time client who was being sued, and I got to shut down the guy suing him in a very satisfying way. So my client had hired a guy who we'll call Kevin as basically a right-hand man for this company. The employment contract wasn't done yet, but they had an agreement that Kevin would work 6 weeks at a lower wage, and then sign the contract and get the agreed-upon wage. So the guy works decently for 5 weeks and then is given the contract to sign. He comes back to the owner, my client, and says that he has some small changes he'd like to make. When the owner gets the contract back, he finds that the small changes involve removing the duties and responsibilities section, basically the job description, and the non-compete and confidentiality clause. Not only that, but he's written in a higher salary than agreed and added a bunch new benefits for himself. Obviously, my client tells him that he can either sign the contract as it was originally laid out, or he can find himself another job. The guy takes the latter option, but he starts a lawsuit against the owner wanting to be paid for the 6 weeks he was supposed to work, which had already been paid, 2 weeks in lieu of notice, and 5 weeks vacation pay. I got the enjoyable job of telling Kevin, in front of a judge, that he wasn't entitled to anything under the employment legislation, and the only way he could get any of that would be if he'd signed the contract. The judge dismissed the case and awarded costs to the defendant, but not before giving Kevin a lecture on wasting the court's time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We had a case where opposing counsel was cross-examining our expert witness on hydrology regarding some silt and runoff issues. Mr. Smith, wouldn't you agree that the book I'm holding is highly respected in your field and considered to be the gold standard on the subject? The witness said, I'm aware that it's highly regarded in my field. Would you be willing to explain in your own words what paragraphs 6 through 10 on page 121 is describing? The witness reads the passage word for word. Yes, I can read, but could you put this passage in your own words for the court? These are my words. I wrote this guide. We were the defendants. We were being sued by an HOA over silt in a lake. We were able to prove that we weren't responsible and prevailed. It actually originated from another site and entered the lake elsewhere. However, that site was owned by a very large corporation, and I don't think the HOA wanted to fight with an entity that could fight forever in court. HOA vs. megacorporations, when a slimy force meets an immoral object. It's the kind of battle you don't have to feel bad watching because you know that either way, some garbage people are going to lose. That said, I guess all the money's going to lawyers on the end, and it would be better if the silt wasn't in the water. Oh well. Intellectual property lawyer. Deep in a set of terms and conditions on a website, our client's details, like his name and contact stuff, were listed. So it's very evident they just copy-pasted our client's legal terms and conditions and missed a couple of details that they needed to change. I was handed the matter, did a quick Control-F for client details, and it was an open and shut case. Not really that impressive, but it saved me hours of time going through each term one after the other, noting exact similarities for a letter of demand. It was 30 years ago, and I still hope to see its like again. I'm on jury duty, we have to sit. The charge is arson. Supposedly, a farmer burned down his barn for insurance money. The prosecutor outlines what they'll prove, that the farmer moved most of the stuff out of the barn into a second barn, then burned down the first barn by pouring fuel, diesel, around the base and setting fire to it to collect insurance on it. Prosecution calls a witness, a neighbor in a subdivision that backed up to the farm who testifies the farmer moved stuff out of the barn over about a week. The neighbor noticed the unusual activity because he was outside building a deck on his vacation. Next, the neighbor saw the farmer walking slowly around the outside of the barn, pouring something from a blue gas can on the lower part of the barn walls. Farmer goes out of sight to the front of the barn, the flames erupt all along the base of said barn, neighbor calls 911. We hear the recorded 911 call in which the neighbor says the farmer has set fire to his barn. By the time the fire department arrives, 5 minutes later, the barn is fully involved and they just act to contain, which is essentially just standing by as they note the nearby ground has been closely mowed, evidently to prevent the spread of flame. The firemen say the flames spread with a rapidity that was out of place even in a wooden barn and they smelled petroleum. Fire investigator employed by the fire department, who came along specifically because of the "he set his barn on fire" report, says that it's definitely arson because of the clear marks on the ground where accelerant has burned, which still smelled of fuel after the fire died down. Police arrest the farmer and take him into the station. More investigators said that there was virtually nothing in the burned barn. There were some ruined tools or equipment, but that there was a good supply of items in the other barn that appeared to have been recently put in place, including some sitting on the grass that was still green underneath the box. Insurance company representative says the barn was insured. The defendant's lawyer says essentially nothing, no cross-examination. Defense calls the farmer, and the first question asked is, "Let's cut to the chase. Did you burn your barn down?" "Yep." "Why did you do it?" It was old and rotten and with termites. It was gonna fall down. Not safe. Huh. Do you usually burn down old farm buildings? Yep, and my daddy did that before me, and his before him. It's a farm. Are you aware that you need a permit to burn debris in this county? Been doing it that way on this farm since we had dangerous engines. Never had no permit. The fine is up to $50. Oh wait, I forgot. You're zoned active agriculture and are exempt. So no permit needed, but why didn't you tell any of this to the police? They didn't ask me no questions till they put handcuffs on me and took me to the police station. They told me anything I said would be used against me and said I had the right to remain silent. And then some lawyer guy came up and told me I was going to go to prison for insurance fraud, and he asked me questions. I remember Perry Mason said don't talk to anyone but your lawyer, so I didn't. Did you file an insurance claim? What for? The barn wasn't worth nothing in that state. That's why I burned it down in the first place. I suggested we explain all of this and try to talk them out of a trial. You said you wanted your day in court. What's up with that? They came on my land, arrested me without telling me what for, told me later it was for arson and insurance fraud and put that in the papers. All my friends, relatives, and neighbors know about this. They made me look dishonest. I want to make sure everyone knows the real facts. I figure this is better than them just dropping it and everyone wondering whether they just decided not to send an old man to prison. The defense rests. During a particularly nasty employment mediation hearing, I got to ask my former employer a question about payments per employment law. I said, did you or did you not pay into a state-mandated unemployment insurance fund for all of your employees past and present? Met by silence. The mediator asked, Sir, answer the question. Silence. Well, then let me ask it. Did you or did you not pay into state-mandated unemployment insurance fund for all of your employees past and present? Silence. All right, I'll take that as a no. In mediation, goodwill in entering into the process and answering relevant questions weighs heavily. They do say it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt, but I do feel that in this case the mouth should have been opened at least once, briefly, just to get the inevitable consequences done, rather than dragging the whole thing out. As a young attorney, I'd stated a claim that an insurance company was dragging out a case in bad faith in the hopes that my elderly client would die before they had to pay him. I was requesting that the trial date be given priority due to my client's advanced age. The judge was no spring chicken himself and seemed skeptical when he asked exactly how old my client was, maybe thinking that he was in his 70s and must merely seem ancient to a baby lawyer like me. When I responded that my client was 92 and the case had already gone on for 5 years, the judge was visibly shocked and immediately granted my motion for priority, shutting down the insurance company attorney's attempts to respond. They wrote us a check for $1 million the next week. I was representing a woman with a severe neck injury. Opposing counsel presented a test result that showed her cervical exam was normal. I felt almost bad when I pointed out he had the wrong cervical area in mind. The most memorable court scene I witnessed was 1968, Sacramento, California. I was waiting to be tried in traffic court, my usual speeding, before Earl Warren Jr., the son of the great Earl Warren of Supreme Court fame. The guy before me was being tried for reckless driving. When it got down to sentencing, Earl Warren Jr. ordered some nominal fine and that the defendant attend traffic school. The defendant got all upset and began ranting how he didn't need to go to traffic school. As the defendant slowed down, Earl Warren Jr. calmly stated, "Well, sir, I can't make you attend traffic school. I can only issue the order for you to attend. If I find out after 2 weeks you've not attended, I'll issue a warrant for your arrest and place you in county jail for 30 days. At the end of which I'll renew the order for you to attend traffic school. So we can keep you going in and out of jail until you decide to attend traffic school." The guy just grumbled and walked out of court. I don't know if he went. I certainly did when I got a similar sentence. It wasn't a trial, though we had one of those and I won it easily. It just always stuck with me because of how clearly the law supported my position to the point that it was inarguable otherwise, and also because of how ridiculous the claim of monetary damages was. A guy moved out of his apartment, turned in his keys, and then came back 15 days later demanding access so that he could retrieve belongings that he'd left behind, which at that point had been trashed. It was just some minor furniture-type items, a lampshade is the only thing I clearly remember, as well as a box of his college notebooks, like the notes he'd taken during class. He was furious and sued the landlord in small claims for $5,000, the state maximum, because his notebooks have such huge value apparently. They hired me and I responded, which moves the case out of small claims, which is just the way it works here. I know that this isn't the case for every state, but our rule is better than yours, end of story. Moving out of small claims put him at a huge disadvantage because now he can't rely on the lax rules of small claims, so he goes out and hires an actual lawyer. The lawyer calls me to try and talk settlement. I know her pretty well, so I wasn't rude or anything, but I kinda scoffed and was like, no, that won't be happening, and I direct her attention to a particular state statute and then read it out loud to her. This statute, unlike everything else in the law, isn't overly long or wordy or hard to follow. It just says bluntly that when someone actually moves out and gives notice of this, items left after 10 days are abandoned, period, end of story. I could feel her deflate on the phone and encouraged her to dismiss the suit. She didn't. We proceeded to a short bench trial in district court that we won. Terrible people had stolen all of this little old lady's money, but their only evidence was a document in the bad person's handwriting that was allegedly dictated. It said September 2012. No day, just the month. Clearly the rogue had forged that when she found out about the lawsuit, and not remembering when she'd stolen it, she'd hoped she could guess within the month so that no one could challenge her. So I was questioning her about it. Exhibit B is the little old lady's bank record. I asked, now, that withdrawal at the bottom, is that the alleged gift? Yes. Can you read the date of that transaction for me? August 25th, 2012. Thank you.
What can kill you easily that people often underestimate? Staircases. Friend of mine slipped, broke his neck, and died. He was 21. As a kid, I remember trying rollerblades down the stairs. One moment, I'm on the top of the stairs, and the next, I'm waking up at the bottom of the stairs with no memory of having fallen. Only some bruises, and I didn't tell my parents in fear of the slipper. Someone else in the vehicle not having their seatbelt on. If your 150-pound passenger isn't wearing a seatbelt, they turn into an unrestrained 150-pound sack of meat and bone during a collision or rollover. That can definitely mess you up if they smack into you. When I met my husband, he never wore his seatbelt. I'm an easygoing girl who doesn't tell him what to do. Except for that. I said that was a deal breaker. So he wears his seatbelt now. Jump ahead a few years. When my husband and I were test driving his car, I turned around and told the car dealer to put his seatbelt on. He laughed. My husband was like, she's serious. You better put it on. I don't know why this makes me smile. Maybe the look on the dude's face when I lectured him about being a torpedo. I said I could not care less what happens to him, but he will not be killing me or my husband. This is how I feel about all reckless driving. If you want to put your life in danger when you're behind the wheel, do it alone on an empty road. If people want to gamble with their own lives, then fine. That's their prerogative. But they're selfish Fs when they put each other's lives at risk. Water. Lakes, pools, etc. People forget how easily their children or themselves can get into trouble while around water. Floating down a lazy river with some beer and friends is, I think, one of the greatest experiences in this life. The most recent time I did this, I drank a lot, and then got separated from my group. At some point, I was kicking to get my floaty to shore, and it suddenly occurred to my inebriated self just how much danger I was in. If I slipped off my raft, I gave myself 50-50 odds of being coordinated enough to get out of the water. At best, and there was no one around to help me. I made it, obviously, but I still shudder when I remember that moment. Perhaps the closest I came to death, and I've been hospitalized on multiple occasions. Yep, I'm a pretty strong swimmer, but it's interesting how even 100 meters stretches out when you're not in the pool, or have circumstances like inebriation or rough conditions. A brief moment of distraction while driving. Just driving in general, you're moving at a high speed in a metal box relying on paint and lights to guide you, while also hoping literally every other driver does the same and doesn't make a mistake. From an emergency medical services point of view, showers, smack, and motorcycles. But the number one cause of injury, according to an overwhelming majority of patients, is not doing anything. Ladders. OSHA posts workplace fatality stats online. Literally every other entry is someone falling to their death from the top of a ladder. The ocean. I live in Australia, and the people from overseas just don't understand how dangerous the ocean can be. Tip for a visitor if you come to Australia, make sure you swim between the flags. That way the lifesavers can keep an eye on you and stop you from getting into trouble. Visited Australia in the summertime a few years back. We went diving on the Great Barrier Reef. Everyone had to wear a jelly suit, full body, one piece, thin wetsuit type of thing, because there are jellyfish so small you can't see and are so powerful they can kill you. Even if you were just swimming, not diving, you had to have this suit on. Back on the boat after our dive, some folks on the boat are swimming and start lowering their toddler into the water to swim. No jelly suit. The boat captain starts freaking and yelling at them to stop. None of them speak English. It was crazy.
One of the other passengers ended up translating for them, but I think the fear of the ocean got lost in translation. They didn't seem concerned. The ocean and its inhabitants are no joke. Also, people who are not in good physical shape at all and cannot swim very well in calm waters, thinking they can handle swimming too far out into the ocean because it seems calm enough. I'm from the US and only have experienced East Coast beaches, so nothing compared to Australia. People still underestimate how powerful the ocean really can be everywhere. Tylenol, #1 leading cause of acute liver failure in the US. ETA. Tylenol is acetaminophen, also called paracetamol. The limit is 4 grams per day. That's just 8 extra-strength Tylenol pills. Other drivers, especially drunk ones. The amount of children who are now orphans because someone decided to drink and drive is very depressing. Blood clots can form in your legs due to inactivity and then travel to your lungs, which is fatal. Can confirm. Was a fairly active 24-year-old college student when I was on bed rest for multiple surgeries. Ended up getting a pulmonary embolism and being put on warfarin for over a year. Best part was when I went into a walk-in clinic complaining of pain of an 11 out of 10 in my chest, and the doctor said I had acid reflux and I had to beg him to x-ray me. Still think back about how easily I could have died if I didn't insist on more tests. If this video is making you feel a general sense of nervousness, dread, and stress at the frailty of life, don't worry, that is happening to the scriptwriter, narrator, and editor of this video as well. Cars. I babysit and nanny for 2 different families, and all of the kids have said their parents let them not wear their seatbelts. And I'm like, what the frick, you could die. You will wear your seatbelt in my car, and I won't move until you do. Alcohol withdrawals. They are some of the worst withdrawals you can put your body through, and in some cases it's worse than smack withdrawals. A lot of substances can just cold turkey off, but I'd recommend weaning off alcohol slowly just so you don't shock your body so hard. This more applies to hardcore alcoholics and not so much to your occasional drinkers. I never knew this until 6 months ago. My dad is an alcoholic. Mum calls me up saying that he's firing his gun in the garage. I race over and convince him after 2 hours to get in the car. Take him to the hospital, and upon release, doctor says if and when he decides to turn his life around, do not stop drinking cold turkey. It will kill him. Alcoholic here. I've gone through withdrawal numerous times, and even then I don't think I've approached delirium tremens more than 3 or 4 times. You know that feeling when you hold your breath for too long, and your body is just going, "Fricking breathe, we need it." That's what it feels like when you're withdrawing from alcohol, except it's all over your body and there's nothing you can do but ride it out. It tends to come on anywhere from 8 to 12 hours after your last drink, and peaks around 12 to 14 hours after. I've read if you can make it 24 hours, your chances of having a seizure at all fall dramatically. If you've timed it wrong, you withdraw at night. Forget sleep. You're going to toss, turn, sweat, and if you're really unfortunate, you'll nod off a little and borderline hallucinate. It's not something I'd recommend. I'd say nighttime is the wrong time for it because, at least in my experience, if you can do it during a busy day, then you at least have crap to do that can distract you. The scariest thing is going through all of this knowing this might be the one that kills you. It's no secret that alcohol withdrawals can kill, at least among alcoholics. You lie on your bed and sweat, wondering if you'll finally have the seizure that sends you to rehab. Take it easy on the booze, folks. It's literally poison. Automatic garage door opener springs. Do not try and fix or replace them on your own. They're deadly. I can vouch for this. Not the deadly aspect, but the more dangerous than you realize, especially while standing on a ladder aspect. Lesson learned. Garage doors are seriously heavy, and those springs make it seem feather light. There's a crap ton of potential energy in them, and unleashing all of it at once is violent. I've heard that they can embed themselves in walls. Garage door springs are very high on my things to absolutely never F with list. Higher than angle grinders and snapping turtles. Being knocked unconscious for too long is super bad for you. It's a lot shorter period than you'd think to get deadly. Some historians theorize that this is what caused Henry VIII to become so unstable. His horse literally flipped on top of him and he stopped breathing for a bit, was unconscious for a few days afterwards. He was very intelligent and a great leader before it, and ended up becoming super paranoid and violent afterwards. Stairs, especially for the 60-plus people, but anyone at any age can fall down stairs. Then they're in debt because of the medical bill and sometimes paralyzed, or your neck gets crunched and you die. This happened a couple of months ago. My sister-in-law's family had a family friend visiting them out of state for a couple of days. They said he would make comments about how steep their stairs were and that someone could easily die falling down them. Well, one night they heard a loud crashing noise and they found the guy unresponsive at the bottom of the steps. Was pronounced dead at the scene when the paramedics arrived. I kinda half-assed making sure both ways were clear before I crossed the road the other day. Then I suddenly realized that even though I do it every day, so it's monotonous and seems like no big deal, not looking both ways is the difference between getting across the road safely and getting hit and killed by a car on the way back from buying a can of Pringles. The narrator can confirm that once in a state of exhausted delirium after an all-nighter finishing an essay, he was struck a glancing blow by a car when he didn't check both ways on the road. Easy, deadly mistake to make, folks. Easter flowers. They've been known to kill dogs and small children, highly toxic. I had a dog that ate one and I had no idea they were poisonous. Few minutes down the road and he started projectile crapping and puking in a circle. I thought he was going to die. It only takes a few for a human to ingest and it'll kill you. Those stupid yellow flowers people plant everywhere. Tulips, narcissus, and I assume daffodils, or maybe that's the same thing, and calla lilies, will kill your animals and also you. I think irises are also on the no-no list. I'm glad your dog was okay. Crowds. The closest I ever came to death was being about 10 feet from the stage at Lollapalooza 94 when the Beastie Boys came on. Parliament Funkadelic was on right before them, and everyone was just dancing, nobody was rushing the stage. The Beastie Boys banner dropped, and I turned around to several thousand people running at me at full speed. I got caught in the pit, and I'm a small person. I was immediately pushed away from my friends. The Beastie Boys were actually yelling at the crowd, telling them that the ladies had as much right to be up front as the guys, look out for friends, etc. People were grabbing my hair and my clothes to stay up, because almost everyone around me was a shirtless guy and pretty slippery with sweat. All the air was up around 6 feet off the ground and I'm a whopping 5'3". Some very aware and awesome strangers noticed I was about to pass out and was only upright because I was being held up by the crush of people around me, and they passed me overhead to the security guys on stage. I easily could have died in that crowd. This is so true. I have a huge respect for folks who watch out for people around them in the crowd at live events. I was once knocked unconscious for a moment by an accidental elbow to the head from a dude next to me, and then came to my senses and realized someone was holding me by the armpits, not letting me fall. And I'm not exactly a small guy. If not for this stranger, I could have easily been trampled and injured seriously. So stay aware in the crowd, folks, for yourself and others. Deer. Stupid, paranoid murder machines with knives on their heads. Most animals will kill you for a reason, or to eat you, but not a deer. Fricking deer. Not only are they psychotic during mating season, but if you hit a buck in your car, the antlers can impale you if they come through your windshield. They are a lot bigger up close than most people realize. I've always found them kind of intimidating. A short fall. A friend fell from about 3 feet and landed on his head. You're still missed. Carrying a bunch of junk in your car. If you wreck, that crap will hurt and or kill you. A bag of canned dog food almost got me. Some diseases that are vaccinated for, such as measles and pertussis, whooping cough, are much more dangerous and carry a higher risk of deadly complications in infants and very young children than in older children and adults. This is one reason why the herd immunity avoided by widespread vaccination is so crucial. Infants cannot be vaccinated against such diseases, but their risk of contracting them can be greatly reduced by those around them being inoculated. Selfies in dangerous locations. I keep an eye on the Wikipedia list of death by selfie. In Nabarangpur, Odisha, India, a man tried to take a selfie with a wounded bear and was mauled to death. Good stuff. I live in an area with a lot of touristy spots, near beaches, and some guy died because he was trying to get a selfie over a blowhole. Not next to, over, as in he stood on top of it hoping to somehow get a good pic of it blowing under him? Don't know the logic behind that, but yeah, he got blown off, obviously into the water, and got swept out to sea. All for the selfie. Somehow it feels okay to chuckle about people dying for the perfect selfie. Obviously it's a huge tragedy, but death resulting from trying to prove you're living in the moment feels oddly poignant. A single punch. It takes disturbingly little effort to kill a human. We are incredibly durable in most ways, but a solid punch to the throat or temple could easily kill on accident. Don't forget the chest. If you bop someone in the right place at the right time, off goes the heart. There was a youth lacrosse player a few years back that was working on his shot. One of his shots hit the crossbar and came back and hit him in the chest at the exact right time and killed him. There was also a minor league hockey player that died from a puck to the chest. The woods. People without much survival knowledge don't seem to realize that nature doesn't give an F about you. The weather, the wilds, the animals, all will kill you as soon as you mess up. I used to teach a wilderness survival course at a scout camp. Eagle Scout represent. A knowledge of how lethal mostly everything in the wilderness is sobering. Drink bad water, get the projectile craps and vomits, and die of dehydration. Eat bad food, or hell, just put food in your body that it's not used to, get the projectile craps, vomits, and die of dehydration. Get wet and stay wet, even in the middle of summer, probably develop hypothermia once the sun sets. Get an open wound, cut, or scrape, it's gonna get infected. Annoy a wild animal, get attacked. And it doesn't even have to be a big traditional predator like a wolf or bear. One kid at the scout camp had to be rushed to the hospital because he and friends cornered a raccoon and was annoying it. Another scout in a different troop got too close to a tom turkey and got mauled. So on and so forth. Yes, I love the woods and I spend quite a bit of time in them, but that means I have a healthy respect for what it can do, and I am prepared. Brain aneurysm. Can happen anytime. You can be the healthiest man in the world and take care of your body all the time and still die from one. And alligators. Eat my eggplant, jungle. Often, alligators paired with brain aneurysms, though the correlation has not been clearly established. Hippos. They may look like harmless, friendly giants, but if you get too close to them, they will absolutely mess you up. Giving birth. Just because we've been doing it for millions of years doesn't mean it won't kill you. Food. Plain and simple. Between unknown allergies, choking, foodborne illnesses, overeating, and a plethora of other possibilities, food is the silent killer that no one expected. Cows. Cows? Cows. They kill more people than sharks. How does a cow kill a shark? Thank you, commenters. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for that little exchange in this dark topic. This is dark, but depression. A lot of people think it's not as bad as it is, and it can get pretty bad. Not depressed anymore, but it was pretty bad, and your brain being so chemically ill, it will tell you things that you would really wonder how you believed it when you're not struggling anymore. This is very true. There's nothing worse than feeling worthless, even when you're surrounded by people who say otherwise. There's nothing worse than losing all enthusiasm for your passions. There's nothing worse than wanting to sleep so you can avoid the waking world. I've lost friends and family to depression. I suffer from it myself, and it's the only problem I can't seem to solve. One of my favorite descriptions of what depression and suicidal tendencies is like is something along the lines of, depression is like being in an upper floor of a burning building. Each day the flames rise up another floor. Some days the firefighters are able to bring the flames down, and other days the flames jump 10 floors. Eventually, it gets to the point where the pain of jumping out of your window is less than the pain and effort of continuing to fight the flames. My therapist quoted someone who I can't remember now, but it was something like the above. David Foster Wallace from the novel Infinite Jest. Swimming in lakes, because there's amoeba and bacteria that can kill you if you have any open wounds or if it gets in your mouth and eyes. Brain-eating amoeba or Naegleria fowleri. It's found in drinking water too. Not living in an area where they're common? I think the greatest danger to me would be the mother fricker who's leaving scorpions in my shower. Fricking everything. Yourself. Between the ages of 10 and 34, taking one's own life is the second most common cause of death, second only to unintentional injury. On average in the US, there are 121 such incidents per day, and the rates in LGBTQ communities are 3 times higher than the national average. Be kind to yourself, people. Emus and cassowaries. Something emu war. Darn, foiled again. I mean, they're giant velociraptors. Who can blame them? Running in front of a train. Seriously, I see people do this a few times a month on my way back to work. If the arm is down, don't run, especially when there's more than 2 tracks. Nobody bothers to look down the freight train tracks. In South Florida, we just got a new passenger train running at 79 miles per hour, on tracks that formerly only had nighttime freight trains at 55 miles per hour. Current score is 7-0, with the passenger train winning against idiot pedestrians. Horses and horseback riding. Even decades-long experienced riders die from injury and accidents. It's not just the ones new to horses and the sport. A coach I had lost her husband in a barrel racing competition from injuries after a bad fall. I myself have fallen off and was stomped on by accident when the horse got upset in a storm. My spleen almost ruptured and I was off work for 3 weeks. They're large 1,200-pound squirrels that can and will spook at the most unexpected crap because it's hardwired into their instincts as prey animals. People don't understand that horses communicate with a lot of subtle physical clues that will let you know a few minutes in advance before it acts out of fear and/or self-defense of itself or its herdmates and offspring. I'm constantly watching ears, eyes, hoofs, and leg positions, tail activity, facial expressions, and body posture when I'm grooming one of the horses, both for changes in mood and because I know I'm doing my job right when grooming if the horse is truly relaxed and happy around me. Working with the horses I do and riding has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I love the animals I work with and care for, but I do not drop my guard when it comes to safety. Not only for myself, but also for the other barn girls and the horses. I would be devastated if someone suffered from something careless that I did. In conclusion, leave unfamiliar horses alone and never work around them without safety for yourself and the animals in mind. What's something harmless your parents did to you as a kid that really screwed you up as an adult? My dad was a huge yeller. Any little thing that went wrong was a full-on expletive-filled barrage. It never scared me or anything because he wasn't violent. However, in my adult life, my wife and I will argue and she'll tell me to stop yelling. I don't have the same yelling scale as other people, it seems, so I think I'm holding back and she thinks I'm yelling. It's very difficult to judge internally, but I'm working on it. My dad's yelling made me terrified of people raising their voices. Same. I full-on panic if I hear that particular tone in someone's voice, even if it's not directed at me. Fortunately, I'm not a yeller myself, though. It's actually really sad. I think his father was far worse, so it's just how he communicates, and I'm not sure he's aware how hurtful it is to others. I'm not yelling! My father yelling. Making it a rule that I could hang out with friends once a week until I graduated high school. I started losing friends very, very quickly. People just wouldn't invite me places because I could never go. The nights I could go out, I had to be back by 8. In high school, before high school it was earlier. So I really didn't have anyone. Nobody wanted to hang out from 5 to 8 on a Friday night. They wanted midnight or so. I completely lack the confidence to make friends now. I haven't had a friend over in years. I'm 28 and my birthday is coming up. When I turn 30, I can't have a party. I'd have nobody to invite. I had a boyfriend throw me a surprise party for my 24th. His friends showed up and my family showed up. It was uncomfortable seeing like 10 people at a bar be my party when none of them were my friends. My brother ended up inviting his friends to add more people. My dad has an issue of making fun of people's appearances and then quickly saying, "I'm just kidding," followed by compliments. I've realized over the years that this has really messed with my self-esteem. It made me really self-conscious, and I never really think I look good. I think in the father's defense, there can be an art to doing this with, and I can't stress this enough, with the right people. Don't do it to your kids all the time. My mum used to joke a lot about my looks. If I stayed in the car for something, she would say, "Show me your ugly face. Good. Now no one will want to kidnap you," etc. Everything she said was, "Because it's funny, you know I don't mean it. You love me because I'm like this." But all it's done is leave me with a mean sense of humor to train myself out of, and constant negativity about myself. I had kinda the opposite experience. My mum would tell me little tips on improving my acne without provocation, then try to tell me I looked just fine. Mixed signals about whether or not I looked fine or not has left me unable to see myself as attractive in any way. After hitting puberty fairly early, anytime my parents saw me in a bathing suit or a tank top and shorts or anything remotely form-fitting, they'd start making jokes about how I was getting fat and needed to watch out if I wanted to stay pretty. I doubt they'd even remember doing it, it was so offhand, but it stuck with me. I was never even remotely close to overweight. I was developing curves, like women do at that age, so by high school I had an eating disorder. I'm at my heaviest now, in recovery, and my BMI has never been above 22. But there's a voice in the back of my mind that I have to fight all the time that tells me actually, I'm on the brink of obesity and I won't be pretty anymore if I eat the second piece of pizza or if I skip out on my 7th day in the row at the gym. My parents did the exact same thing. Offhand little comments, I'm sure they never paid 2 seconds thought. That impacts me to this day. My mother was horrified when I repeated a comment she made to me as a teenager about me eating so much that I'd be as big as a house.
Thought there was no way in God's earth she'd ever say that, and I'm like, okay, then why do I remember it 10 years later? And also, why do I have an eating disorder? It almost makes it more hurtful when it's offhand or unintentional. Then you second guess and wonder if they're making jokes to gently tell you their real feelings. Same as you, I've never realistically been overweight, but I have no ability to look at my body and see what's really there. But I'm starting to get better, and I'm glad to hear that someone else is too. Using fast food and candy as an incentive for everything. I was morbidly obese by 11, and high school is rough when you're heavy. It took most of high school to reach a normal weight, and I still count calories and watch my diet carefully to sustain it. There's ample evidence which shows childhood obesity has dramatic effects on adulthood health, even if you manage to lose the weight. I'm glad you lost some weight and are taking steps to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Thanks, it's been more effort to maintain over the past 10 years than it was losing the weight. About 95% of people who go on diets gain it all back or end up at a higher weight. The best way to avoid the trap is to avoid needing to lose weight at all, which comes back to parents helping their kids with healthy eating and exercise. My dad has a temper and yells angrily about everything. Not really at us, but if some little thing doesn't go perfectly the way he wanted, he will just start screaming about it. This has happened so often and still does, and it contributes largely to the severe anxiety disorder I have now. My dad would do this too. It would almost always cause me to start crying, and then he would start yelling at me for crying for no reason. It would get to the point where he would yell if he even thought I was starting to cry, even if I wasn't, and all that has left me with some bad anxiety too. My mum claims that he yells because he's partially deaf and doesn't know how loud he is, but I don't know if I believe that. I get this. I have sound-induced anxiety too because my mum's husband/sperm donor never spoke to me, only yelled at me. Even a car backfiring gives me a mini panic attack. I will mention that this seems to be one of the more common contributors to adult anxiety that has come up in this thread. Parents, save it for the occasions where it's really needed, if at all. My grandmother would never let me leave the house. Now I'm extremely antisocial. It's actually incredible with all the other stories I'm reading that are talking about parents who seem almost bat-crap insane. I'm hearing people who are 14 that were trapped in their houses because their parents were control freaks. I mean, when I was in elementary, I got bullied for never being cool and never being seen outside. I lived in a pretty bad neighborhood, but it wasn't a problem. You guys need to throw your whole parents away. They denied ever sending me and my sister to a day camp at which I was harassed by an adult. Being told that my emotions were wrong/not right. For all the good grades I had, I'm emotionally immature. Yeah, I was straight out not allowed to be angry. It wasn't a written rule, but that's how it worked. No matter the problem at hand, or even if it was a completely reasonable thing to be upset about, putting on an angry face, raising my voice, or changing my voice tone would result in my mother getting very aggressive. And suddenly the actual problem was forgotten, and it was all about the attitude. The only way to actually solve some problems was to repress anger as much as possible. But then she wouldn't take the problems seriously because obviously I wasn't upset over them. But saying something like, "This makes me very angry," even with a fully calm voice, would just get her angry because nothing was ever a reason for me to be angry apparently. But not for her. She could show her anger as much as she wanted. Then she doesn't understand why I don't like to share my problems with her. I guess she's like that because Grandpa used to be one of those angry guys who started shouting very loud at the tiniest issue. I didn't get to know him, but everything she's told me about him went in the same direction. So I guess she's just scared of aggression, and that's why she reacts so strongly to it. Grandpa likely wasn't allowed emotions as a kid. It was also times of war, which likely messed with him too. Sometimes people can be hard to understand, but there's always a reason. Cleaning. My mother always freaked out and screamed anytime something looked messy. The whole cleaning process, picking up items, laundry, dusting, vacuuming, was always a huge ordeal and never good enough for her. I hate cleaning and I try really hard to keep my apartment neat, but I always associate cleaning with screaming. My husband is more messy than I am, and I sometimes can feel myself getting overly agitated with him, and I try so hard not to scream at him over a pile of laundry. I relate to this so darn much. My mother has insane and arbitrary standards for tidiness, and if I don't do something right or don't do it exactly right at the right time, it's yelling time. Getting teased about being a girl just trying to be friends with everyone, including boys. Every single one of them was, "my boyfriend," or "I must have a crush" or something. It can't just be me wanting to have friends. To this day, I really can't get close enough to guys to have a serious relationship. That, and I have a neglectful father, and every time I consider it, I'm petrified of bringing home an actual boyfriend to meet the family because I don't want to be teased anymore. It made me just feel so uncomfortable about who I can, should, or want to be friends with because I'm paranoid my family is mocking me behind my back. It didn't even need to be a friend. Just any story about anything that had occurred at school that happened to have a girl involved. Oh, who is X? Is she your girlfriend? Nowadays it's, how come you never tell us anything about your personal life? I grew up with Indian parents in America. Who are those girls you're talking to? Why are you talking to them? Every girl I talk to they look upon with suspicion to the point where they took me out of school and did homeschool to avoid friends? Seriously, my parents ruined my social skills forever. All I wanted my whole life was to fit in, to be a normal kid. Now they get angry that I don't share stuff with them. I always log out of my social media so they don't view it, and they complain that I'm neglecting my family because I hang out with my friends. I just know I'm going to raise my kids better, differently. I will never trust my parents. As someone whose parents quietly despaired of him ever bringing home any sort of partner until it actually happened, I guess I got the better end of that balance. When I was potty training, my potty was in the middle of the room. I have vague memories of my mum's friends watching me poop and laughing at my poop when I stood up. These memories are confirmed by my mum after I asked her. I'm 100% sure that's the reason I can't poop in public, or even at home if anyone can hear me. If you were anything like my nephew, you may have demanded an audience in the first place. He drags his potty out from the bathroom to the living room and wherever the most spectators are. I can't fault his competence. Gaze upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. My mum, jokingly, she says it was a joke nowadays, asked if I was pregnant every time my time of the month was late. I would spank my lower stomach for hours on end because I thought I was pregnant from sitting on the toilet. I was 12, and I didn't do the deed with anyone until I was 19. Anytime I would cry or express anger, I would be teased for being upset. Aw, she's mad. Aw, wah. Oh, boo-hoo. I ended up shutting down and finding unhealthy ways to cope that eventually plagued my life in more ways than one. They always shrugged off my accomplishments of course you got straight A's, you're so smart, or congrats on this huge accomplishment, but I mean, we're not surprised. What they thought they were doing was complimenting me, and they were doing that. I never saw it was anything else until I grew up and realized I won't try at anything I'm not immediately good at, and feel inferior to anyone who's better than me at something. While they were complimenting my intelligence, they should have been complimenting my work ethic. Now, I struggle with a fixed mindset and feel like a big bucket of wasted potential because I'm so terrified of failure. It's not their fault, they didn't do anything wrong, and we didn't know about the importance of grit and growth mindset back then. Ironically, a lot of smart kids get screwed over by a whole fixed mindset thing, even though they were complimented by it at the time. My parents do the same thing. Them giving me this expectation isn't helpful to my worrisome mind. I'm constantly expected to get better grades than my sister, even though she cheated on a lot of her work. I can account for my fear when my American history teacher told me that I got an 85% on my test. I ran to the bathroom and cried for about 30 minutes. Knowing my parents would be angry, I felt as if I was in a corner with nothing I could do. When she passed the grades out during class, the next day, I got a 95. I was really confused. I asked her about it, and she claimed she never said that I got an 85 on it. I looked through, and I really had a 95. I must have misheard or something, but it ended up seriously damaging my psyche. I seriously wish that I didn't have these expectations at all. I hope that nobody else ever has these, too. Watching my brother get praised for bringing it up to C's and rewarded with a dirt bike, while I sit waiting in the next chair to get reamed for slacking off and failing and then getting punished or grounded because there was one B on my report card. Then again, my dad's biggest parenting achievement was apparently, "At least I didn't get drunk and beat you all the time." Yay. Thanks, Yondu. I was raised in a church where virginity until marriage was sacred. I'd been a victim of the unspeakable act and repeatedly harassed as a child. The messages tumbling around in my mind growing up involved a lot of shame and being inherently unworthy of love. I'm finally in therapy for the abuse and more, and undoing the lies I learned so very well. Mum smoked 3 packs per day but didn't want us kids to be around the smoke all the time, so she set up her personal space, i.e. a chair where she reads books anytime she isn't working. Away from us, and we missed out on a whole lot of affection or interaction because of her habit. It took a lot of time and healing to have a healthy relationship with a woman. Happily married 8 years this coming October. Congrats on your marriage. Gosh, that's a mixed viewpoint. I mean, nice that she cared about caring for your health and well-being, but my God, interacting with your kids is so important. She could have taken down her per-day intake to exercise some care with her kids.
My mum used to tell my sister and I that she was too claustrophobic to hug us. Didn't have that problem with our little siblings though. I guess the claustrophobia cleared up. My mom used to tell me stories about a big hairy spider that was gonna come bite me if I got out of bed at night. I still frickin' hate spiders. My mother got tickets for a small boat and canal tour in Amsterdam for the two of us. Somehow, as a little kid, I wanted to keep those tickets, 'cause why not? So instead of just giving them, she wanted me to practice mental calculation for a bit. So she gave me a few questions on the lines of, a ticket for an adult costs this much, one for a child, this much, how much should a family pay with X adults and X children? I got 2 or 3 right, the last one on the other hand, I couldn't get it right. She even asked me 3 or 4 times more for the last one, each time more aggravated than the last time. Last answer yet again wrong, and she got kind of too frustrated with me, and she tore the tickets up and the whole boat trip was probably awkward for me. Now, 10 plus years later, I realize I have a fear of failure. I'm scared to screw up the things I do, say, think, and even how I look. Even now, typing this brings me a bit into tears. Worst fear of failure is that I'm very quickly to think that I'll disappoint my parents and my current boyfriend, making me say sorry way too often as well. Moving around. By the time I'd finished elementary school, I'd been to 5 cities and 2 states. I became very good at making friendships and getting into relationships, but I had a very hard time keeping them. My parents were and are helicopter parents. Along with this, they didn't care enough to teach me valuable lessons or anything I'd actually need in life. It was all grades, 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 Allah, Allah, Allah. The result? I lacked many of the social skills people had, such as basic cooking, social skills, etc., and also had and still have social anxiety, especially with authority, even if I don't see them as a threat, which one time ultimately nearly made me take my own life. My parents wanted me to be happy, which sounds fine out of context, but no. I wasn't allowed to be anything but happy. You can bet I would have gotten a lecture for anything less than cheerful. Comfort is antagonizing. Disappointment and annoyance feels shameful, and to this day, I don't fully trust anyone at all with my thoughts or feelings. My dad would often playfully hit me in the head with plastic bottles, rolled up newspapers, etc. He usually hit harder than he probably meant to, and then when I'd say ow, he'd tell me to toughen up, that couldn't have hurt, blah blah. Now years later, I still find myself flinching at the most random of things. Oof. There's a saying, all kids deserve parents, but not all parents deserve kids. And I've been thinking it the entire way through recording this. My parents would scream and fight over a lot of stupid things and then blame it on me and not my siblings. When they did that, they brushed it off, didn't think anything was wrong when I cried about it, and yelled at me for being dramatic. I'm a triplet and the middle child, so I always had to do stuff my siblings didn't. When I was around 10, my brother and I had a big fight, and I was forced into anger management therapy. But my brother wasn't, so it really messed with my head. They also talk to the other two a lot, and when I try to say something, they unconsciously ignore me, because they think I'll say something hurtful or stupid. My mum used to make fun of me for fulfilling manly stereotypes, such as only wanting to wear 1 pair of shoes, hated makeup and clothes, shopping, even as a teen, not being able to find something despite it being right in front of me, etc. I'm really insecure about my femininity now. So much to where if I do something annoying that's stereotypically feminine and someone calls me out on it, I'm secretly super flattered that they think I'm girly. I'm also bisexual, so being a woman who likes women sometimes makes me feel really masculine and uncomfortable, even though I know it's irrational. Just laughing at me for getting upset about something stupid and telling me how silly I was being. There's nothing wrong with that, but I was just a sensitive kid and took away from that showing your sad and upset emotions was bad and that it should be avoided in company of others at all costs. It really messed me up in the long term, and I didn't get help because I couldn't talk about it to my parents for the same fear of being laughed at. I can't blame them, and I really don't, because it's really something I see quite a lot of, and with 99% of kids, it's harmless. I, however, am still recovering from years of mental crap. Neglect. Neglect seems harmless. People are busy with their own lives, right? But that lack of love does terrible things to a child. Severe depression, self-esteem issues, trust issues, loneliness becomes normal. Numbness becomes a habit. I wish I were dead, but the medicine helps, a bit. As a child, my parents would send me to bed without dinner if I misbehaved. I'd be so hungry in the middle of the night and I'd scramble up to the pantry and sneak whatever I could, mostly snacks for school lunches. I'd sneak back, squirrel it down, and throw the wrappers away carefully. I was also raised as the good one or the people pleaser. I've struggled with secret eating, binging, portion control, and anxiety for as long as I can remember. Eating never made sense. Couple this with the people-pleasing, and I'm just a chubby, conflicted mess with a high tolerance for all kinds of narcissistic people. I'm a parent now, and it's all clear as day. I'm working on myself, and hopefully I can be better to my kids. Helicopter parenting. I was never out of my mum's sight. I know she's an abuse survivor of a bad home, and I know she really did mean well, but now I'm suspicious of everything and afraid to try new things. Both my parents would sometimes leave randomly without telling me. My mum would leave whenever she was angry at my dad, and I was so young that I thought she would never come back. My dad didn't like to talk about it, and it would sometimes be for extended periods of time. My dad would disappear to the bar and not come home until 1 or 2ish in the morning, where I lived with him. About 13 years old at the time. Neither one sees how this could have negatively impacted me. I still get very scared of people leaving me. They sent me to speech therapy when I was 12. Until then, I had no idea that I had a bit of a speech impediment, and while I was a bit shy, I never felt bad about the way that I spoke. Speech therapy would have been great if I'd wanted to be there. Instead, I was suddenly made to feel like I was terrible at talking, and almost as bad, being forced to fix the way I talked with a bunch of 3 to 5-year-old kids. I had my own teacher, but I still had to wait with all the smaller kids. I was so angry that I actively tried not to do anything that the speech therapist wanted me to do. By my parents' thinking, sending me to speech therapy was probably an investment for my future. Talking is one of the pillars of society, but 15 years later, I still occasionally feel extremely self-conscious about the way my voice sounds, and I dread talking with people that I don't know. I would never tell them this, of course. Men. What's something that would surprise women about life as a man? I'm a guy with kids and a wife who is a nurse that works nights. It's almost impossible for me to go to do stuff with them without someone saying something about daddy duty or mom got a free day today, huh? It's ridiculous. Not every male with a child out there is some deadbeat parent who only hangs out with their kids when they absolutely have to. As a single dad, I can relate. People act like I'm on some extreme adventure of babysitting, when in reality, I'm taking my 2 kids with me grocery shopping. I'm a single dad 24/7, it's my life. No biggie. My ex and I separated 6 weeks ago. Yesterday, I took my 14-month-old daughter to a parent and toddler group, and a woman there asked me if I was babysitting. I was absolutely frickin' livid, but I couldn't and wouldn't let on how I felt. I had to settle for, no, are you? No idea whether she got the message or not, but the look of confusion on her face was nice to see. This sort of post has come up in the past, and overwhelmingly, men say they don't get sincerely complimented often enough, so when it happens, it sticks with them for a long time. I had such an opportunity at the grocery store a week or so ago. A man was walking toward me, and I noticed he had a nice beard, so I decided to tell him I liked his beard. He smiled and touched it and said thank you. I feel like it was a small but good deed, and I hope it sticks with him as the genuine compliment that it was. Bearded guy here. Whenever I got complimented about my beard, mostly by men, a little flower opens up in my heart. We definitely enjoy compliments. I just got out of a 4-year relationship, and during some reminiscing thoughts, I realized she never once told me I looked nice or called me handsome or anything. I told her she was beautiful every day for 4 years, and I don't even know if she found me attractive. I have high self-esteem, which is probably why I didn't notice it was going on until after we broke up. I learned a long time ago that no one is going to love me the way I love me. She was a good girl. I'm sure she didn't realize she was doing it. It sucks. I've been there. We're also the ones that are supposed to initiate doing the deed when we don't even know if our girl is attracted to us. I've never felt the same longing in my life that some of these gentlemen do, but it's definitely a valid one. Positive affirmation is never a bad thing, even if someone doesn't necessarily show how happy it makes them. Some of us are just bad at taking compliments, but they do appreciate them. The biggest turn-on for a guy is if she shows interest in you. That's seriously the number one thing on my list of things that makes women attractive to me. And that's a problem, because I often find myself in relationships that aren't healthy in the long term for me. But holy crap, when a girl shows interest, it's like all the other items on my list of things that are good for me when a partner is concerned go out the window. And I brush off and justify all the things I've literally internalized as bad for me. Like, for instance, a girl who isn't innately curious has no potential for me. And I know this, but if any girl shows interest, it's like, give it another chance. It'll work out this time. It's different because she likes you a lot. Scumbag brain and scumbag pee-pee collude on a lot of this stuff. It's stuff like this that gets me some of the most. Constantly being the one who had to take the risk, put their foot forward first, take charge first. It's exhausting. Like, sometimes, couldn't you just decide where to go? Couldn't you sometimes initiate intimate moments? Couldn't you sometimes message me first?
I finally found the girl who I think I match with damn near perfectly, but the communication is such a huge issue. It's exhausting, and if we don't fix it, this will stagnate, and I'll never feel like it's right. But she is an attractive girl in a world where her social media posts gets all of the attention, and as far as I can tell, all of her conversations are initiated by her friends. I don't think she understands what it's like on this end. She has a huge network of people interested in her. I'm just an average Joe with a few good friends and some acquaintances I'm friends with. We pretty much go through life unnoticed, save for negative attention. I've been going to a pet supply store for about a decade, and although I'm always greeted nicely, I'm generally left alone. I walked in with a baby in a carrier one day, and I was greeted by everyone, and every single employee went out of their way to ask me what I was getting and if they could get it for me. I was fully capable of getting a 30-pound bag of dog food and the baby, but one employee simply wasn't having it. He ran back to grab the food and carried it to the checkout and then carried it to the car. I was shocked. I told my wife about it and she said, "They do that every time you go there, don't they?" Apparently, this is the customer service she receives every single time she goes there, or pretty much anywhere with decent customer service. She was shocked to hear that I didn't receive the same service. Me too. I love taking my 8-year-old daughter shopping because everyone is so nice and smiles at us. I'm a big scary guy, 6'4", 280 pounds, so no one smiles at me when I'm alone. 1. How much we would like to feel wanted and not simply useful or needed. 2. How much pressure there is on us in terms of body image. We hear about all the crap women go through, but do you ever stop to think about all the eggplant size jokes? That alone can cause insecurity, and that doesn't even touch things like losing your hair, graying, muscle mass, etc. That we really do care a lot more than society says we do. We're just not allowed to show it because that's a sign of weakness, and we're taught at a young age that you have to put up a perfect image or no one will ever want you. The first point hits home for me. Sometimes I confide in my wife that I don't feel wanted, and she gives me a crooked look. She goes on to explain all the reasons I'm useful and needed in the household, but never expresses how or why I'm wanted. I like kids. Kids are funny, they like breaking rules to have fun, and they still have an imagination. I don't screw kids. Hell, I hardly screw adults either, but that's beside the point. A girl I went on a date with last week showed me a picture of this adorable little boy, her neighbor's son, and told me she sometimes goes to her neighbor's house just to see him. When I told her that I didn't think that would ever be the case for me, she seemed sad and asked why. I'm a guy. Hello, Susan. It would make my night if I could take your goofy 6-year-old daughter out for ice cream. I've had a very depressing day. You can F off before I call the police. How's that? That works too. Have a nice night. See you never. It's the same for me. I always tickle-thought my children and we're totally goofy. I just love children. They're clever and funny, cute, and have awesome imaginations. But no matter how cute somebody else's child is, I would never want to be alone with them or get into a tickle fight. You know, I almost put "touch them" on the last sentence, but in my mind I thought, oh man, that would be bad. When in my brain I was thinking, picking up a 2-year-old and saying hi to them. Society is sick. I volunteer at an after-school program. Every so often one of the kids, maybe 12 to 15 years old, will see me on the bus, run over and talk to me. And I'll feel the eyes of every single woman on the bus, making sure everything is cool there. I've had more than one woman ask, "Is he bothering you, honey?" Or switch seats so that they have a clearer view. I'm a clean-looking 34-year-old dude in a suit. That would never happen to a woman, and it's kinda sad. It's interesting, isn't it? Even as a guy who's worked with kids, I feel like I would make the same assumptions about seeing these guys do this, and I don't see how to change it on a societal level. Men have just as hard a time overcoming stereotypes as women. You, a woman, want to learn how to ride a motorcycle or want to be a programmer, and you don't want to be a housewife or spend all day cooking? Good for you! You, a man, don't want to cut the grass or learn to fix your car by yourself, and you want to spend all day cleaning the house and sewing pillowcases? Wake the F up and support your family. I get dirty looks anytime I mention that my wife does the mowing and most of the raking, like I've failed as a husband. If anything, I've won as a husband. I've got a wife that loves me enough to do the hard, annoying work because she knows my allergies will knock me on my butt. Same with cooking. Oh, giving the wife a night off, eh? Hell no. I cook every night. She knows I hate doing the dishes, so we made a deal. Man, this angry rant made me feel good about my wife. Haha. The book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg actually described this pretty well. She said life as a man or woman is like running a marathon. With women, people from the sidelines are saying, "You can quit whenever you want, it'll be okay," which signified lower expectations professionally. Whereas men, people from the sidelines are saying, "You can do it, just finish," which signified people telling men to stay and keep going regardless, even if that's not ultimately what they wanted. It's hard not to want to disappoint or be judged by others.
That metaphor really resonated with me, because the pressure is pretty real on both sides for these really real reasons. My ex fell into a trap of unrealistic expectations. She told me outright that she couldn't stand the fact that I didn't know what she was thinking without her telling me. Do I look like a freaking mind reader? I'm not completely awful at taking subtle hints, but I'm only human. If you tell me you need to go to a certain store to pick up a certain thing, and you say it in passing and never bring it up again, how can you possibly be mad at me a week later for not having taken you to said store? Take yourself to the store. Wait for Christmas and I'll buy you that coat, because I'm not that clueless and I will remember. Married almost 5 years. Made a separate Etsy/Amazon account for the husband. I go on there and make wish lists and never check the order history. Helped tremendously. One year I told him I need panties. I got 47 pairs for Christmas and nothing else. Dish towels for my birthday. Yeah. Wish lists save marriages. I remember my wife asked me years ago, "Hey, get any compliments on your bald head?" It was a drastic change, shaved head. She thought it fit my style. At the time, I only worked with guys. She looked amazed and shocked when I laughingly replied, "Are you serious?" I doubt anyone noticed. She thought I was heartbroken, but in reality, I would have been surprised if anyone did compliment. It's very rare to find a company or place of work that allows men to follow a seasonal dress code. It's really hot in the summer? Women can wear dresses or skirts, men are still wearing suits. It would be nice to be able to wear a nice pair of shorts if it's really hot out. The company where I used to work allowed men to take off their ties if it was over 90 degrees in the office. Can't get more accommodating than that. Haven't seen this one yet. My girlfriend was absolutely bamboozled by the fact that our family jewels can be raised or lowered by flexing. I mean, she was speechless for a good 3 minutes. Just to clarify, it's the cremaster muscle. Imagine you are trying to cut a pea short, now hold that flexed muscle. This works best when it's hot out and balls are hanging low. You will see the jewels move upward all the way to the base of your girthy manhood. Wait, what? Be right back. It's been 2 hours. For God's sake, man, are you all right? He may have overclenched. Get the tongs! From my experience, women talk about the act of doing the deed with their friends much more, and in much more graphic detail than men talk about the same subject with their guy friends. I guess my point is that men aren't as sleazy or gratuitous as most women make us out to be. Conversations with me and my dudes about doing the deed? Friend 1. So how did things work out with her? Me. Oh yeah. Grins slightly. Dude. Nods in satisfaction. That's literally all there is to it. I mean, some men are still way too into trying to talk about the details of their encounters in the most graphic and disrespectful way possible, but my first man here is right in that they are in the minority. The complete and total lack of regard or value for our own lives, both internally and all too often externally. I don't mean to pick fights here, but when you hear about women and children first, men must register for the military draft, etc., it gets ingrained into you. You learn slowly but surely that your value is contingent upon what you do and not just who you are. You never feel truly satisfied just being there, just existing. You always feel like you have to constantly be working at something. And God forbid you ever become unemployed. Then you're essentially invisible. A homeless woman is often seen as more of a pity or someone to be sympathetic to. She must have been abused, had the unspeakable acts committed against her, etc. A homeless man? He's seen as a threat. He's seen as an outcast. There's little sympathy, even though, oftentimes, he may have gone through those exact same issues as the woman. It often feels like, on a certain level, society tends to see any problem that women have as being externally caused, whereas men's issues are often seen as his own failures or doings, etc. Men's problems are seen as being internally caused. Men are seen as having more control, which can be beneficial if you're wanting to be in a position of esteem and power, but it can also be harmful if you're struggling with mental illness or just to make ends meet. And that's why, I think, we so often refuse to seek help. We don't want to admit that a problem might be there, because we're afraid it'll turn into an indictment of ourselves, and no one will sit there and say, "It's not your fault, you're good enough, you're valuable just as a human being." Because I've never felt that a man's life is seen as unconditionally valuable. It's valued so often based mostly on what he does, or failing that, doesn't do. Women and children, by contrast, are valued just by being. It's a bitter pill to swallow once you grow up and become a man. You still remember being valued, but it's just not there anymore. You're supposed to have all this control, but you don't. Eventually, that pill all too often becomes literal. That's why we turn to green herb, doing the deed, video games, painkillers, adult flicks, the internet, social media, alcohol, smack, wherever we can escape to and pretend that we have control through or value in. We're taught from a young age that things don't happen to you, they happen because of you. You got a raise at work? Clearly you're a hard worker. Have a wife? Obviously you wooed her correctly. Got divorced? You messed up. She just fell out of love with you? You should have fought harder for her. You're depressed? You need to suck it up. It's so lonely. Hugely important issue. Everyone, and in my opinion, especially men, should read this recent article on loneliness from the New York Times. Now, I've noticed a couple of things that relate to this issue. First of all, I've observed men form deep friendships and relationships generally, through shared experience much more than talk. It simply doesn't feel like support if you're just talking to me about me unless we've seen some crap together, which is a key difference for women. I've observed women mostly feel the support of strangers, which does not happen for men. The void that is male loneliness can be filled by camaraderie of joint work on a project, of following a team, or scientific, political, business venture for us nerds, all together, and of discussions or arguments that may seem idiotic or too distant to be the true issue. At this point, I'm mostly just talking out of my butt, but I remember that convincing men to talk about personal issues is usually like convincing a wall to talk. Instead, take me out to a movie, to a diner for a milkshake and a silver cup. Go to the fricking gym, or to a cooking shop or craft class. Second, I want to talk about older men for a second with regards to loneliness. If the things I've said above apply to us 20-somethings, they apply tenfold to the generations before. Many older men have lost some or all of the friends that shared their experiences. To cancer, murder, time, etc., these friends are gone, and it is, or seems nearly impossible, to form a comparable replacement. So older men don't even try. They may form surface friendships at the bar, but as I said, that's hardly going to scratch the itch of loneliness. It might keep them going, but so many older men just look and act like husks of their former selves because they no longer have friends. This issue is huge. Interesting thoughts. Here in Australia, we have this phenomenon called a man shed to help older men deal with loneliness. It's usually run by a local community and provides usually older men with a place to work on projects in a social setting. It's been quite effective in preventing and treating depression, from what I understand. Also, picking up hobbies like amateur astronomy, etc. can be a conduit to forming more meaningful friendships. A lot of my guy friends are simultaneously very lonely and seem very intimidated by the prospect of even trying new things. Initiatives like the Shed idea are great, as are trying out adult classes for something you've been curious about for a long time. I think most women would be surprised to learn that our pee doesn't always come out in a nice, steady, straight stream. My wife still assumes I have no aim because of the times where it may be coming out in more of a splash manner, or the stream is just completely directed haywire. Does anybody else get splash on their shins? It's really gross when I'm wearing shorts. Gross when you feel it on your shins, but for me it's worse realizing after it also happens when you wear jeans, but you just don't feel it. You have to be scared of kids. For example, one time I was in the supermarket and a little kid came up and told me he was lost. But because people jump to call men kiddie diddlers here in the US, instead of walking the kid to the front or trying to help him find his mum and dad, I had to tell him to stand there and not move, and I went to the front and got an employee. Now here's the craziest thing. The first employee I found was a male, and his response was, "Hang on, it's store policy that male employees don't handle these situations." So he had to go and get a female employee who then helped the kid out. I asked the guy after why that was the policy, even though I kind of knew the answer, and he explained to me that it's happened just before in this store alone, where a male employee had gone to comfort a crying kid or help them find their parents, and either the parents or a stranger had accused them of trying to kidnap them. So if you haven't thought about this before, there you go. Now if you see a guy walking past a kid who's lost, you know why they might have just walked past them. It's not a lack of wanting to help, it's the intense fear of being falsely labeled something. Well, here's a few. Number 1, how much crap we give each other as banter from a young age. Borderline bullying at times, but it's definitely helped us to man up. Number 2, not every guy is a handyman. Number 3, body issues affect us greatly. It's overlooked as we don't often share it, as we generally don't have the same level of emotional support that women provide each other. 4, most common advice we have is to just deal with it. How awkward it is to cry or be emotional in front of other people, even in situations where it would be normal, such as funerals. Usually bottle that stuff up and save it for when you're alone, and then let it out so no one sees. When my dog died, I went with my family and girlfriend at the time. I was 20. After they put him down, I went out of the room and cried in my girlfriend's arms. I apologized heavily for it over and over. Even when talking about it with a friend later, I tried to downplay the crying and he told me, What do you expect? For me to tell you to F you for crying, you sissy B-word? Your goddamn dog died. Of course you cried. Probably the first intimate initial moment I had with my now husband was when we first started dating. His grandfather died. Husband's ex-girlfriend showed up to his grandpa's funeral, and they ended up doing the deed. He was so messed up over it. I called him later to ask how he was doing, and he told me all of it and lost it crying. I drove over and comforted him, but the fact that he trusted me enough to tell me what happened and to cry in front of me really stuck with me. He kept apologizing. I'm not sure if it was over doing the deed with his ex or crying, but I was like, holy crap, you have nothing to apologize about. We hadn't decided to be exclusive at that point, and told him I still cry about my mum from time to time, and that's okay. It's so incredibly messed up the way society expects men to downplay or deny their own grief or sadness. Tears are a testament to the depth of a relationship or connection. It's total bullcrap that they're not okay to shed. How much stress a man can undergo without a mental breakdown. My wife stays at home with the kids and I work 65 hours a week so we can live in the suburbs. She has no idea how hard it can be to say no to her or the kids because money is tight. It breaks my heart sometimes to not be able to give them everything they desire. My wife could never understand how tough that can be on me. Feeling like I'm not doing enough or not man enough to provide. Tough crap. Life as a dad and a man. Sole breadwinner. It can be tough mentally and physically. My wife works hard. She takes care of our kids and our house. She also pays the bills. But I'm so tired. Always. What's the best question someone asked in life skills class? During student teaching, I heard a question a kid had asked. The kid raised his hand and asked, "So, if the mom were to have chest cancer, would her milk still be safe for the baby to drink?" The teacher thought it was a very out-of-the-box question, but unique, and praised the kid for thinking of it. I think they said their response was something along the lines of, "The mom probably wouldn't be in any shape to breastfeed." So the kid says, "Oh, okay, so could the baby still drink milk out of the dad's pee-pee?" The teacher had to turn around to avoid losing it in front of the kid. If you came on a table, would it move?" He was trying to ask if the sperm moved around in the seminal fluid, but had some poor choice of words. Wait, that's not how you check for mimics? "If I keep letting him pee on me, will I get pregnant?" Best day of my entire schooling career ever. When I was in 6th grade, we had something called FLE, I think it stood for Family Life Education or something, that was pretty much just a life skills class. It wasn't co-ed, so all of us, 11 and 12-year-old guys, were being taught by a homeroom teacher and the computer teacher. They gave us index cards to write questions down, and someone asked, "How do whales do the deed?" The teachers thought it was funny, but they didn't answer, and after a few minutes, I guess someone asked again because comp teacher asks, "Okay, what's up with you guys and whales?" I mean, now I kind of want to know what's up with whales. In a certain species of whale, a friend prevents them from sinking by letting them do the deed on his back. Our viewers should have now realized that when I'm saying life skills, the word I'm swapping out is SEX education, so the video doesn't get demonetized. There are, however, a lot of other words that I'm swapping out as well, obviously. I went to a private religious university that did a yearly life skills talk where the folks could submit questions about a week beforehand, and then have them answered anonymously at the talk. Best one was when the doctor leading the talk, scrolling through his list of questions, reads, "What is pubic hair for?" Pauses for a sec and says, "I have no idea," and just keeps scrolling on to the next one. Made me chuckle anyway. I did ask that question in life skills once, and I was laughed at by the class, and the teacher also did a, "I don't know," and moved on. I too have been waiting for an answer for over 20 years. I always assumed it was a protective cushion, just like the hair on your head. Hair on the head protects a little bit from bonks and falls. The hair on your bits protects them when you're smashing them together. So the teacher told us wearing 2 rubbers is actually less effective because of the increased friction, and a top mind in my class asked, "If you go fast enough, could you start a fire?" Asking the really important questions. A kid in 5th grade asked what the flavors on rubbers are for, while trying to stifle his laughter. The teacher responded with, "Use your best judgment." Can you get an STD if a guy splooges in your ear? Cue the rest of the class slowly turning their heads to look at this girl. You can develop hearing aids. Ha 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 ha. When a teacher was explaining that you could in fact get STDs from oral fun times, a girl in my grade asked, "How can you catch an STD over the phone?" Solid question, I thought. Fun fact, telephone area codes in the UK use STD, subscriber trunk dialing, for long-distance calls. So in the 1960s and 70s, it was new and exciting to have a phone with STD. The teacher told us the average size of male anatomy. Girl beside me whips out a ruler, marks it, and proclaims, "That's tiny!" She then proceeded to ask if the balls slide in too, followed by a hand motion and a sound. Had us all in stitches. There was a girl I was friends with in high school that was pretty fun, but known as a more, intimate person. She was dating a 26-year-old when she was like 16, stuff like that. When I took life skills class with her, the best gem of a conversation with our teacher went something like this. She said, "You know how when guys climax before the splooge comes out? There's a pre-splooge. Teacher, yes, why? Can this pre-splooge get someone pregnant?" "Yes, there can still be sperm cells present." "Well, that sure sucks. Can I please be excused?" She texted me later and told me she wasn't pregnant, thank God, but the timing of it was like a sitcom. Does peanut butter make your chest grow bigger? This was asked by one of the most popular girls in the 5th grade. I mean, if you eat lots and it makes you fat, you get a bigger chest, right? We had an anonymous question box where students could ask questions they were too embarrassed to raise their hands and ask. A lot of times people would just write joke questions, but the teacher would read them anyway. One day the teacher reads the question, "Is it better to pleasure yourself with your left or your right pee-pee?" A kid in the back audibly says, "You're supposed to have two?" and immediately starts crying. I'm a little concerned because these sorts of classes usually take place in their teens. If that kid was that unsure of such an extreme fact of human anatomy, I'm worried. Here's one more chat from the anonymous questions box. If semen comes out at 30 miles per hour, how fast does a baby come out? Dear God, the anonymous question box was great in my high school. My second child came out close to that speed. Doctor almost didn't catch her. We had a box where people could write a question they were too embarrassed to ask, and someone would read them aloud for the teacher to answer. The best one was, "If I'm doing a girl in the butt and she farts, will my balls explode?" And the answer was... After she finally got the room of 15-year-olds to stop laughing, she informed us that no, it will cause him no harm. One of the 5th graders asked, "Does adult fun times feel good?" Poor teacher had no idea how to answer that. My dad asked that to his parents after they gave him and his brother a book about doing the deed. Apparently, my grandfather had to explain straight-faced that if it wasn't good, then no one would be doing it. A story from my friend's 5th grade life skills class, someone asked the male teacher what the climax felt like, and after consideration he said, "Like a sneeze, but good." I've always felt like that was a solid description. What's going to happen with all of these cucumbers after class? Girl drawing male anatomy on the whiteboard and then asks herself quietly, but loud enough for people to hear, "Are the balls in front of the pee-pee or behind?" I remember when the abstinence-only crew came to our class and presented their spiel about how life is so much better if you wait until marriage, and all that, then presented an opportunity to ask a question anonymously by dropping your question in a box. One kid asked how deep the butthole goes. Some kid asked what doing it in the ear was. The teacher squinted at him and went, "What?" Depending on when this was, the kid probably saw the Family Guy episode about that and assumed it was the real thing. Our teacher was telling us the different methods of pregnancy and STD prevention, and he said that the only way to 100% prevent both is abstinence. A guy said, "Where can you buy an abstinence?" Kid, why do people bounce up and down when they do the deed? Teacher, very casually, "I don't know, I guess they just think it feels better that way." Well, frick, that's one professional teacher. There's no way I would have been able to keep a straight face. Just imagine, a man with his eggplant and some lady and they're just not moving, just lying on top of each other, keeping silent, and awkward eye contact the entire time. In middle school life class, our educator was about to go on her spiel about abstinence. A golden exchange went down a little something like this. "We're going to talk about a certain concept today. It starts with the letter A. Who knows what we might be talking about?" A 12-year-old girl shouts across the room a word that begins with A and means doing it in the butt. My teacher asked my class on a similar note, "What's the one sure way to avoid HIV?" Guy in my class stands up and announces with his hands on his hips, "Only do it in the butt. If only." Sincerely from the gay community. I can't believe that in not one, but 2 abstinence classes, kids were throwing them off by asking questions about doing it in the butt. Well done, kids. My friend.
Can we cook human egg into an omelette?
Good days. My 9th grade life class teacher liked to pick on the students a little bit for fun, and he asked one of the boys, "What would you do if you walked into a room and there was an undressed woman on your bed?" The kid immediately said,
"Is it my mom?"
I've spent many years teaching life class. In that time, many obscure questions have been asked, and I've prided on keeping a straight face and answering professionally. Apart from once. A class of 30 13-year-old boys and girls. The boy at the far end of my classroom, "Sir, what happens if we pee in her when we're doing the deed?" Quick as you like, a girl quipped up, "She'll dump you, you daft F-word."
I did that once and she said it turned her on.
You have an odd taste in women.
I came here to write, is it possible to pee in a girl during fun times? This must be a more common question than I thought.
Our 5th grade, 10-year-olds or so, life class, we had to turn in any questions on anonymous note cards. One person just wrote, "Why do people do the deed?" They had a good point. The video we watched didn't say anything about it being enjoyable or rewarding at all, just the mechanics of it. For kids who hadn't developed the urges yet, it was weird as F to think about.
Can you break a hard pee-pee? Can I get pregnant from a dog?
Popular blonde girl, 9th grade.
Oh no.
I think you mean ruh-roh. With a diagram of female anatomy projected on the wall, a kid raised his hand and said, "I have a question." Everyone stopped and looked at him. The teacher said, "All right, go ahead."
"So that's where I put it in, right?"
The teacher says, "Well, if you're talking about the act of doing the deed, then yes." The kid spoke loud enough for the room to hear him as he made a little note,
"Put pee-pee in hoo-ha."
Then said,
"Okay, can we go now?"
Our teacher told the class that since we wouldn't ask a single question at the end of the 3-day class, we each had to write a question on a piece of paper, fold it up, and give it to him. He only chose a few pieces of paper to read from, and mine was the first.
Can you have 3 biological parents? Me and a few of my buddies have been debating this for a while, and I wanted to prove to them that it wasn't possible.
So he read it and got pretty annoyed and said, "No, it's not possible. Y'all are some messed up kids." Everyone was laughing, which made him even angrier. He angrily read the rest of the notes and then had the principal come in to talk to the class for quite a while. I asked at a Jewish day school, if it's Passover and a girl has a yeast infection, is it unkosher to eat her out? If you wear Coca-Cola flavored protection, do you have Coca-Cola flavored babies? Happened in 5th grade. Not really a question, but still funny as heck. Kid 1.
What happens if the protection breaks?
Teacher. Then your partner will become pregnant. Kid 2.
Oh, crap.
Teacher. Are you trying to tell me that you're active in that way? Kid.
Not since I lost your mom's phone number.
That kid was suspended for a week. Wasn't from a student, but the teacher said one of the silliest things I'd ever heard. He said he classifies oral fun times as the same as regular doing the deed, because the splooge can drip down into her hoo-ha from her mouth and impregnate her. I was stunned. Dear listeners, that was one hell of a statement to convert to a YouTube-friendly, safe-for-work format, and to know that a teacher said that in its uncensored format to children. My goodness gracious.
What happens when you pull your foreskin back too far?
Lots of pain and blood, along with a quick trip to the hospital is what happens. It's not fun. Can you get pregnant from doing it in the butt? Teacher, see me after class? My favorite reply to a question was a 5th grade girl. When I wipe, I can see I have some hair down there. How do I get rid of it? Of course, my response is along the lines of, it's natural, you don't need to get rid of it, it protects your body. To which a sassy little thing replied to her with a wave of her hand,
Girl, my mom gets a Brazilian, I'm just gonna do that.
I had a hard time keeping a straight face. There was a kid in my grade who always asked some fairly strange questions during life class. Highlights included when he asked if a bug could crawl into a hoo-ha and if he could get it off with a glass of water as an adult fun time aid. 7th grade biology, not life class, we were talking about the 2-headed girls. My friend asked which one felt the climax when they did the deed and what the other head is supposed to do when they're doing it. Do they look away or is it basically a threesome? I nearly busted one myself from laughing so hard. Life class in an all-boys school. The lecturer mentioned that HIV can be transmitted orally and by doing it in the butt due to bodily fluid transfer during said events, but then said that the HIV virus cannot survive long exposures to air. I put 2 and 2 together and asked, so is doing the deed airtight, while miming the penetration act with my fingers. I got detention for a week. If 2 bearded men kiss, will they get crabs? Watts Middle High School, Centerville, Ohio, circa 1981. Credit the anonymous question submission box and a teacher willing to read out loud whatever questions came out of the box. Oh well, screw it, I've got a story for this. We had a gay dude with HIV come to my summer camp to do a life class talk. He asked if we had any questions, saying, literally any question. Someone took it literally and asked, what's the biggest PP you've ever had? Without missing a beat, the instructor said, bigger than yours. If you're doing it really hard, can your PP break off? Still cheers me up. Showing my age here, I was in high school when Jersey Shore was in its heyday. There's an episode where Snooki refuses to go into the ocean because it's full of frickin' whale sperm. So a girl in my class asked our health teacher if the ocean was in fact full of whale semen. My name is Ed. A girl asked me, so what day do we start life class? I took advantage of the situation and started rubbing my hands together and saying, ah yes, whenever you like. An awkward silence followed, then one kid says, oh, and starts busting up laughing. Then a whole cascade of laughs happen as people start to get it, and then the crowd that needed an explanation. A later addition to this story. Isn't it obvious enough that this happened in 7th grade when I was 12 years old? My goodness, I condemn those horrible kind of creeps, and I'm also an IT consultant that happily performed my duty to report on an executive who had kiddie content on his computer. Also, I admit, I thought of it at the beginning of the semester and I was dying for the right moment to say it. Thank you for clearing that up, Ed. I must admit I automatically assumed you were a teacher and I was getting very, very concerned. Not quite life class, but my high school brought in a guy that specialized in STDs to teach us about them, how to recognize when we or our partner is infected, and how to protect against them in general. Had an anonymous Q&A section where people wrote down their questions on paper and put it in a box, then he randomly drew and discussed. Most of the questions were either decent ones or your basic wee-wee jokes. Then he pulled one out and read, is it safe to do the deed on my dog? And everyone just burst out laughing. After a moment or two of the teachers getting everyone calmed down, he started talking. We all expected him to launch into how this is disgusting and unsafe, etc. We completely lost our crap when he went on to not only say that it was perfectly safe, apparently the only known STD transmissible between humans and canines results in a flu-like infection for a few weeks and that's it, but he actually went on to say that since humans and dogs cannot get pregnant from each other, he actually recommends this. The horror on our teachers' faces was absolutely priceless. It's truly a shame that this happened in the days before smartphones were really a thing. That crap was front-page grade madness. If a guy puts a pee-pee in a butt, can it get turned inside out? A guy in our 5th grade life class asked me if he could fit his entire head inside a hoo-ha, and then proceeded to sing A Whole New World. Dude was 10. Someone asked if you could use saran wrap, the crinkly plastic candy wrappers for stuff like Jolly Ranchers, as a makeshift rubber. The entire class couldn't help laughing and we got in trouble because we all had to agree to be mature. You can't make freshmen act mature. Can you still get pregnant if the PP is too small and can't reach the cervix? Professor Speaker Person looked high as F trying to comprehend that one. How is Babby formed? 38 plus 2 weeks pregnant? Can u get pregente? Is semen flammable? What color is a zebra's pee-pee? Wait, I can contribute here. Guy in the 7th grade loudly decried wearing a rubber and said he had a better method. He'd put lemon juice on his pee-pee just before doing the deed, and even though it was terrible stinging for both of them, it killed the sperm and meant he could go in raw, worry-free. The next year he dropped to take care of his newborn child. Is D-word for a female common adult fun times toy a country? The girl was an idiot, and the funniest part was, she asked the head of the geography department. There is a city in Newfoundland with that name, from the last I remember. You can Google it. Number 1. Do people really say giggity giggity while doing the deed? 2.
It's been said women have 3 holes. Please explain.
3.
How does the woman poop out the baby?
8th grade life skills class.
Can you use duct tape instead of a rubber?
Anonymous note in the question box.
Had a guy ask this anonymously via card in a hat during one of those life class things during freshman year of college. The card read, PP plus PP, ? First question. Professor was tenured and didn't give an F, so she looks at the group and says, I can only interpret this as asking if you have one. It will be located between your legs and will be slightly smaller than your pinky.
Would have to say the best question I heard was from my 15-year-old sister and her best friend in health class this past year. Had the box with written anonymous question. First question was theirs.
What do you do when guys don't understand no?
My sister said teacher just stood there like, I don't know how to respond to that. The proper answer is pepper spray. 8th grade health class had a pretty chill teacher. After spring break, we begin the life class health unit. Teacher starts the class off. What do people typically find attractive in others? Obviously, he was expecting a few answers, some maybe a little edgier than others. Before anyone else could answer, a kid just blurts out, feet! This wasn't a question, but something I said in life skills class when I was like 13 or so, and for a while I found it embarrassing, but now I just find it funny. We were discussing the fact that when a woman is pregnant, her time of the month stops. So I, ever the class clown, said, so the baby's kind of like a tampon, right? It just sucks up all the blood like a very tiny vampire. The entire class and the teacher, actually, screw her, she was my science teacher for 2 years, and she was a butthole, looked at me like I'd absolutely lost my mind. Teachers. How easy is it to tell if a student has a crush on another? And what interesting moments between the two can you share?
High school teacher. Depending on the kids' personalities, they either get louder or quieter when their crushes are present. The loud ones are frickin' annoying. The quiet ones are the ones I would say purposefully sit next to their crushes. Oh god, I just realized that my 66-year-old GOV teacher totally knows.
Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly oblivious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things, though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girl never realizes that the guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen. It's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student.
It's called crushing self-doubt. I had a girl literally ask me out, and I slept on it and convinced myself she was just screwing with me in an attempt to embarrass me. Oh, similar to me, there was a girl me and my friends all liked in primary school. I said no in case they had bad intent. What if a girl was just too shy to find out herself?
Back in 5th grade, I had a crush on a girl named Jenny. She was sweet and I really liked her, even if, innocently. Since this was 5th grade in the elementary school, I was in Boy Scouts with her brother, and my best friend told said brother that I had a crush on his sister, and he apparently passed it along to Jenny. Toward the end of the school year, she hands me a folded-up note telling me not to read it until after I got home. I waited like 5 minutes and popped that sucker open, and it's basically a confession that her brother told me that I liked her, but that he sometimes lies to her, and she just wanted me to check either yes or no. I was so embarrassed that her brother told her that I just ignored the letter completely. Oof. Well, to be honest, I know people who aren't much better attuned as grown adults either. I am completely oblivious to signals, as are a lot of my friends of all genders. Awkward story, my students are all between 8 and 10, and a few have noticeably hit the point where they're obviously starting to notice the opposite sex. I have 2 students that I'll give fake names. A boy, James, and a girl, Lucy, in my class. They're always together, recess, lunchtime, free choice, and the 2 are always working together. They're both very shy and giggly, and it seemed a mutual crush was there, noted by me and their math teacher as well. One day I hear James getting teased by some other kids for his crush on Lucy. His math teacher and I pull him aside and have a talk with him. We tell him that we'll be talking with the class as a whole about crushes and teasing. He's not the only one. His math teacher also tells him that if he does have a crush on Lucy, it's nothing to be embarrassed about because she's a nice, sweet girl. James just looks awkward and asks to go, so we let him. A few days later, I'm walking my kids out to the parent pickup and I see Lucy's dad is here to pick her up. James waves to both of them as they leave and I ask if he's been over to Lucy's house to play and if he knows her dad.
Yeah, miss, that's my uncle.
Oh, crap. I've encouraged cousin love. I awkwardly gather my nerves to say,
so you remember that talk we had about Lucy and liking her? Well, I didn't realize she was your cousin. Yeah, I thought you didn't. That was weird, miss.
Then he just laughed and said he liked a different girl anyway in his older sister's class. In conclusion, 10-year-old is into cougars, not cousins. Oh man, the longing stares across the room, the almost wistful what-ifs you can just see in their eyes. When I was in middle school, that was me. Fortunately, the girls in the bar after 1:30 are usually drunk and desperate too.
Not really. I close down the local bar about once a week. I'm happily married but friends with one of the bartenders, so I hang out until our shift is over if there are sketchy people, and there are almost always sketchy people. It's like the old saying, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. I had a toothless dude and his wife sit down next to me. She literally had a bandaged head wound, and he asked me for a threesome, so she wouldn't have to die not knowing a woman's touch. Computer science/computational physics university lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women 10-1 in my lecture groups. Odd scenarios. My favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman, who was in the realms of shy but unremittingly kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this and they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots. So the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, and then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away. Like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win, but there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game when one of them, honest to God, vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her, but terrible for me. I found their fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy.
I'm a substitute teacher, and my favorite student with a blatant crush experience was with a 2nd grade class. I picked the kids up from the yard after recess, and a boy came to me very upset because one of the girls had been chasing him the entire recess. Once we got back to class, I talked with the girl asking for her side of the story. Conversation went something like this. Me. Jose was pretty upset about something that happened this recess. Do you want to tell me what happened? Girl.
We were playing.
He said you were chasing him. Is that true? Slight blush.
Yeah?
Do you think he wanted you to be chasing him?
No.
If you knew he didn't want to be chased, why were you chasing him? Huge blush, guilty smile, and hunched shoulders. He makes me laugh. It's funny how something that would be completely creepy and unacceptable in the realm of grown adults seems so cute when it's between little kids. Don't know what that says about us. I worked in the kindergarten for a brief period between high school and uni, and there were a couple of little 5-year-old girls who just walked up to the boys they decided they liked and kissed them forcefully, informing them that they were now their husbands. But the one that sticks to mind is the little 2.5-year-old from my group. She spoke only a little at the time and didn't bother much with learning the names of the grown-ups to any extent. But shortly before I left, they hired a really young guy, about 19, as an assistant. The girl sees him walking into the ward for the first time and just freezes. She actually dropped her toy and her eyes go round like saucers, her jaw dropping. It was both adorable and absolutely hilarious to watch. We introduced him and none of the kids were that fussed, but she just stood there, mouthing his name, whispering it to herself a few times to make sure she got it right. He sat down on the playmat with her and she couldn't take her eyes off him. She offered him a toy which he accepted gracefully, and I swear she lost her breath. From then on, she loved him. She was quite shy to begin with, walking up to him at times, saying his name, and then when she got his attention, she would giggle uncontrollably, blushing bright red, and run away. If he took sick days or didn't come in till late, she would get sort of depressed and not want to play much. All the kids played favorites with the assistants, little boys have their crushes and so on, but this one was a little different. It was as if she had decided he was her soulmate. He was so kind to her, and the kind of relationship they had was never anything that made you think anything creepy. He just couldn't bear to reject her. In the afternoons, he'd read to the kids for as long as they were willing to sit still and listen, and she always made sure to be the one to sit on his lap or next to him to flip the pages. I'm teaching 7th grade right now. It's crazy easy to tell. It makes me wonder if I was that oblivious when I was their age, or worse, if there were girls that were obvious towards me and I didn't notice. It's like they don't even hide it. One of my boys carries a girl's books every day. It's clear to me that he has a crush on her. I learned recently that she has a different one of these guys to carry her books between every class. I mean, that's just manipulative. She's got to know, right?
Maybe, maybe not. As clueless as these guys are that carrying books isn't some grand romantic gesture, she may be just as unaware that's why they're doing it. Girlfriends do that stuff for each other all the time. We borrow and lend and carry and hide and all of that. So a guy doing that is basically doing friendship stuff from her perspective. Also, we pay attention to each other a lot. We notice if there's a new haircut or sweater or she's lost weight and all that. That's normal everyday behavior, especially for teenage girls. I've got a 9th grader and I've seen her around some of the guys in her orchestra. They bring her music over, ask with fixed and nervous smiles how she's doing today, sit next to her at picnics and stuff. One of them even asked her to get my recipe for baked beans. And you've got to be desperate for conversation when baked beans recipe seems to be the logical choice. But when I asked if there's any guys into her, she shrugged and says, "Nah, boys don't really notice me." I finally sat down and was like, "Look, I don't want you spilling this or embarrassing them, but Todd, Joe, and Mike, not real names, all like you. They can't come out and say it, but they are interested in you. Do whatever you want with that knowledge, but you should know what the signs of interest look like." And I laid it out for her. She honestly had no idea what low-key stuff looks like, because movies and all that are always big sweeping gestures, not quietly jockeying for a seat as 4th chair if you're 2nd, so they can sit next to you, or having your eyes way too wide open, or talking to you about some quite banal things just to talk to you. Not that I'm saying guys should all be super romantic and swing for the fences, but a huge number of dudes didn't realize they'd been flirted with over the years. Girls have the same problem. We're not exactly speaking 2 different languages, but we're sure as hell working from different subtexts. I'll say again, this is just confirming to me that a lot of adults are barely more evolved than kids in how they behave when it comes to matters of the heart. I have this one teacher that will totally just say anything that's on her mind. Once she just flat out said, "Do you guys like each other or what?" to these 2 kids in my class. Within 3 days, they were dating and still are. That could have just as easily resulted in them being super embarrassed and avoiding each other forever. I know a teacher who did this all of the time. She paired kids together so much in her mind that she was obsessed with getting 2 kids together. Once there was this girl who liked to hang out with this guy in her class. The very first day she asked if they were dating, and the girl just said no because she had a boyfriend, and they were very happy. For weeks, the teacher would ask if her and her boyfriend had broken up yet, so that her and this other guy could date. Eventually, the girl told her to stop because rumors were starting to spread around the school. Then the day came when the teacher asked and the girl just ran out of the room crying because her boyfriend actually broke up with her. Her and the other boy never got together, but it was funny to see my sister give our teacher the death stare for making her feel bad, even when the teacher told her to stop because it was making her uncomfortable. Band in high school is a funny place. Since kids are around each other a lot more of the time than the average student, they tend to get band goggles. It's pretty obvious to see relationships blossoming. More often than not, it's a good thing, but every now and again you get the older upperclassmen boys going after naive freshman girls. And boy oh boy, does that turn ugly quick. The drama can be outrageous. Funniest, most shocking moment, a girl who's an awesome student had been dating a true player on and off for the last year. She went so far to tell me that she got back together with him after he cheated on her. So literally last Friday, I'm sitting in the band hall watching the kids practice. This sweet girl comes into the hall and is walking with a sense of purpose. As she passes me, she says something under her breath that I didn't quite get the first time. Confused by what she said, I watch her walk up to the guy. She grabs him by the shoulders and spins him around. She says something to which he responds with a short answer, but had that look on his face that he got caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. She then balls up her fists and socks the guy 4 to 5 times and then storms off. At that point, I realized that what she said was, "Teacher, you're gonna have to write me an office referral." Best referral ever. I teach English. I remember a star football player, senior, coming into the room to rap with me for a bit before the 3rd period start every Friday. In my 3rd period, a female student, junior, of mine, who was extremely intelligent and very pretty, yet somewhat shy being an AP student and all, was sitting in the front row and always stared at him when he came in. He would talk about football and stuff with me, and every so often I'd look back at her still staring right at him and smiling the entire time. She would not turn that smile off no matter who was looking or what anyone said. It was actually one of the cutest/saddest things I've ever seen, seeing as how the guy never even turned around to notice her. If he did, who knows, maybe they would have hit it off. Maybe they did after they weren't my students. Is no one going to question that a football player rapped with you during school? Do you teach at East High? Okay, after 5 people writing me to tell me the meaning of the word rap, I think that no one needed to. At the very least, you guys should have just seen I was making a pop culture reference. Former 6th grade teacher here, I was here to witness one of my kids take his first big leap, at lunch. He asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately, the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this screwbag, go out with me." She smiled and said okay. He was pretty shattered for the rest of the week. He was in the same class as the girl, so there was a lot of longing looks and wistful sighs. I'm pretty sure that's the kind of thing you remember forever. Middle school is tough, man. I wasn't a teacher. I was a teacher helper? I mean, it was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting because they look straight at me and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush, it is the long stares at the back of their crush's head while fiddling with an object like the pencil or their hair. As a quick look away when the crush looks at them, it's easy. God damn, how many of our teachers were chuckling under their breath watching our antics at school? Anyone else wondering? Oh, it's painfully obvious most of the time. Here are some things I saw. Continuous glances at the same person. Body language that positions the person closer to the other person. Interjecting into a conversation that the person was not engaged in to begin with. Being helpful more so for that person than for anyone else in class. Flirting, obviously. Boastful storytelling. A lot of times it's outlandish and very obviously untrue. Hanging around the other person uninvited. And checking out the other person while oblivious to their surroundings. What's funny is that most people think they're being sneaky or inconspicuous. From my vantage point in the front of the classroom, these things seem so obvious as to be genuinely painful to observe. It was especially painful when the feelings were intentionally unreciprocated. I taught in college for a bit, if you're wondering. I'm not a teacher, but in 6th grade, 2002, a girl in my class, history with Mrs. Thompson, sat in the next row over from me every day. I was crushing on another girl and ignorant of the fact that she liked me. Midwinter, Mrs. Thompson is handing back papers and stops between the two of us while glancing back and forth and says something along the lines of, "I don't know who to give this paper back to." She says the girl's first name, or Mr., my last name. Mrs. Thompson hands the paper back to her. She'd been practicing writing her name with my last name so much in her notebook, apparently like many teenage girls do, that she had accidentally written it on her homework when she handed it in. 6 years later at my high school graduation, a half dozen of my former teachers, including Mrs. Thompson, were sitting around talking with my friends and me and brought up that paper where a girl had written my last name on her paper. They found it cute and endearing and told other various stories of middle school love. A year and a half ago, I married that girl. College perspective. I can usually tell which of my students have hooked up. I can almost always tell when the girls are crushing on guys in my classes. It's usually painfully obvious, especially from the perspective of the front of the room. I can also tell that you're texting, no matter how much you work to camouflage it. Sometimes when I assign group work of any kind, I like to intentionally split up or subvert the secret lovebirds, just to see how they react. I'm a bit of a sadist like that. Oh, freshmen, all pheromones, alcohol, romantic overconfidence, and a complete lack of experience with the real world. So much fun. I work in college and teach early morning classes to 17 to 24-year-olds, mostly. It's painfully obvious who just did a walk of shame to class and occasionally who's screwing someone else in the room. The most awkward thing that ever happened was some guy who came into the class and interrupted a lecture to hit on a girl in the front row. He wasn't even a student, just some idiot who walked by our open campus and recognized the girl through the window as the girl who he saw at Jack in the Box a week earlier. He comes in and just starts talking to her. I'm in such shock that this guy just randomly walked in that I was speechless and just stood there watching it. After about a minute, I came to my senses and realized the situation. Here's this 40-plus-year-old dude, tatted up with his pants hanging from his butt, reeking of booze and cigarettes at 9 a.m., hitting on a very uncomfortable-looking tiny blonde, 18 years old. I told him this is my classroom and that I wouldn't have him interrupting. He would have to go. He didn't put up a fight, he just asked when the class was over so he could come back to mac him some. I told him we were out at noon. We were really done by 10, and that was the last day of class. The day of the final, a week later, on a different room, I kept my eyes open, but he never showed. I asked the student, but she only knew him from a single instance of standing in line in front of him at Jack in the Box. I teach 16-year-olds. When a girl likes a guy, she'll draw hearts on his notes. When a guy likes a girl, he'll draw male anatomy on her notes. That might be the greatest thing I've read in this collection of stories.
A couple met in my high school chemistry classroom. This was 3 years ago. He was a junior in high school, she was a sophomore. They told me last fall that when the date is set, I'll be invited to the wedding. Best example of chemistry ever. This actually happened in my acting class just today. Our teacher said he had an exercise to show us how much subtext there is under the surface of our actions. Pick a person in here who you have something you desperately want to say something to and never could. Think about it really hard and don't make eye contact with them, or they'll know. Everyone in this class knows each other very well. There's a lot of dirt to stir up. The silence was deep and uncomfortable. Now, go ahead and say it. You could hear their buttholes pucker. People looked numb with fear and hesitation. The teacher, having proved his point about rich subtext, opened his mouth to end the exercise before anyone could actually speak. Now, just then a kid jumped up from his chair arduously and let loose with, "Sadie, you're hot as hell and I want to frick your brains out." The room exploded. The result was pandemonium. One kid was laughing so hard he nearly tipped his desk right over onto the floor. The teacher was in shock. The kid was red in the face and laughing uneasily. The amazing thing was the girl. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge it, nothing. She just sat there, stock still, like Marie Antoinette at the guillotine, totally above the situation. I think she must have been mortified and didn't know what to do. The teacher's response, "I have been doing that exercise for decades, and no one has ever actually said anything." The next day, and I crap you not, I saw this kid and Sadie walk in, a little apart, both grinning. He was listening to a song on her iPod. They both fell asleep in class. Great success. Medical professionals. What's something ridiculous you've had to explain to your patients? Story from 2015. To an 84-year-old man with a candlestick in his rectum. That you don't need to massage your prostate with a candle once a month. A doctor had apparently told him 15 years ago to do this, and he had not questioned it since. I was going to say, well, it was a different time, but then I realized 15 years ago was the year 2000. September changed a lot of things, man. Firefighter/EMT here. Just because you're taking medication for something doesn't mean it's going to go away. Here's a real conversation that happens about once or twice per shift at minimum. Me. Do you have any medical history, diseases, sicknesses, and/or conditions I should be aware of? Patient. No. Are you currently taking or supposed to be taking any medications? Yeah, I'm on insert 12 different medications here. Ah, I see one of your medications is metformin. Are you a diabetic? Not anymore. I just told you I take meds for it. Me. Sigh. I had to explain to my 75-year-old grandmother that there isn't one straight tube connecting your ears. She put eardrops in, put cotton in her other ear before she laid down so it wouldn't leak out the other side. Those instructions must have gone in one ear and out the other. Having to explain that I can't figure out what's wrong with them over the phone. My mom called me and asked me what the rash on her elbow was. After 5 minutes of trying to explain that I needed to see the rash, I finally asked her what she thought of the shirt I was wearing. Took her a couple of seconds to figure it out. I mean, that's just a special level of ignorance right there. In the words of Ron Burgundy, I'm not even angry, I'm impressed. You're more likely to die from a dental abscess than dental x-rays. Dr. Oz is full of crap. I also hate it when people say, well, if they're so safe, then why do you step out of the room? And they act like it's fricking stumped me. The reason I step out of the room when taking x-rays is because I do that almost every day. You get it once every 3 years. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but you equate it to a bartender asked to share his drink with a customer. You can have a drink every once in a while, but if the bartender has to drink with every customer, he'd be very sick. Overweight lady with some liver damage. Had many conversations about diet and reducing alcohol intake. Patient had cut out whiskey and vodka, but did not know that Guinness had alcohol. Yes, this was in rural Ireland. About no alcohol. Alright, I'll just stick to Guinness then. No, that has alcohol in it. Really? But what about stout? Porter? IPA? Lager? Ale? Cider? My personal favourites are when the families of a loved one bring in food that's completely counter to their current medical condition. Off the top of my head, I've had a family bring in a get-well cake to their dad, who was on his 5th or 6th admission to DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. He was still on an insulin infusion, and the family didn't see the problem with giving him a cake because he woke up and was hungry. I've had families order in pizza to have a pizza party when their parent is admitted on the cardiology ward and on a salt and fluid restricted diet due to extensive heart failure.
Good times. When I had my appendix removed, every fricking body brought me food. I had to go a week without anything, and they kept bringing me food. Returning visitors, food again. Only one person brought me a book to actually pass the time. I was crying and giving the food away, and crying and giving it away. It was awful. It is hard-coded into our DNA, I suppose. Just like every grandma resolves every situation with food, thus we are bound to go down the same road. I'm diabetic. I have a family that does these things. I tell them, no, I can't eat that. They insist that I can have a little bit, right? Hand me a huge slice of cake. No, I can't even eat a little bit. They try to make me feel guilty for not eating the cake they brought me. I have specific instructions now when I'm at the hospital. I'm currently under medical quarantine. I cannot be disturbed. It's weird to pretend to have MRSA. Medical professional here. Have many stories that fit the bill. One that sticks in my mind is a patient, 15-year-old kid that suffered a traumatic head injury, was in the ICU barely able to speak, obvious cognitive impairments due to the injury, and the family was strictly instructed to refrain from feeding him anything. Nothing by mouth, no water, nothing. The next morning I get an emergency page from the ICU because the patient is going into respiratory failure. I rush over to see the pulmonologist and nursing staff performing CPR on the kid. The parents are outside the room freaking out. Sadly, the kid didn't make it. Upon the autopsy, they pulled out a pepperoni slice, crust, and green jello from the kid's lungs. It was devastating as hell to tell the kid's parents that they killed him by sneaking him in food. The kid's throat muscles were so weakened by the brain injury that most of the food was ending up in his lungs. The parents thought that the medical team wasn't feeding him for yucks. The only way they could convey their love for him at this time was to give him foods he loved. Tragic lesson learned, I hope. That was pretty upsetting. I can't even imagine living with the knowledge of what happened. Let the rest of us know not to do this, folks. Paramedic friend of mine has had to explain to multiple people that diabetes is not something that everyone ends up getting in life. When a woman lets her diabetic son eat ridiculous amounts of sugar, then gets him to run around in the yard to burn it all off because I don't like pumping him full of all that insulin. That's not how this works, lady. Shadowed a dentist in a rural area where most patients were in poverty. One guy was so confused on why his teeth were rotting. He revealed that his diet consisted of sugar, and alcohol. The dentist had to explain sugar can lead to enamel loss. The guy said, "Nope, that's a lie. My wife is a dentist and had a similar patient tell her that it wasn't the sugar but the fluoride in the water that causes decay." I was in hospital with my girlfriend while the nurse undressed her. The nurse asked if it was all right for me to be in there. She knew we were together, and we said yes with a confused look. She then told us the story of a couple in their 80s who were in, and when she took down the wife's top to check her heartbeat, the husband covered his eyes and ran out of the room while the wife burst into tears. 40+ years of marriage, and they'd never seen each other in the nude. That's sad. Really, really frickin' sad. Taking a medication twice a day does not mean taking the doses together. One dose now, one dose later. Not both doses now. On a side note, don't give your son your sleeping medication. Ever. I remember in a country doctor's notebook, this young doctor who had just started in rural Russia, initially with no clue what the frick he was doing, and making it up as he went along for some stuff, had a patient with an infection of some sort. The guy was very smart and he enjoyed having an intellectual conversation with him, gave him the pills and sent him on his way. Then, a few days later, he saw the same guy in for a med OD. He said, "It was going to take weeks taking those pills, so I decided to just take them all at once and be done with it." A side note, this was adapted into a short series starring Jon Hamm and Daniel Radcliffe and is available on Netflix, called A Young Doctor's Notebook. It's really great. Radcliffe does a great job as the doctor. Repeat patient of the STD clinic I work at. Isn't there something I can buy, like over the counter, so I don't have to keep coming back in for chlamydia? Me. Contraceptive? Dirty patient. Nah, miss, I meant like a tea or something. When the doctors or nurses tell you it's a very bad idea to leave AMA or against medical advice, you should take their advice. Several years ago when I was a phlebot, a person who drew blood, I went to the nursing station so I could grab someone to follow me into the room. The patient was given a clot-busting drug, TPA. This stuff makes heparin look like child's play, and I would need to have a nurse hold pressure on the puncture site for at least 5 to 10 minutes to see if it had stopped bleeding in that time. The nurse told me stone-faced that they left AMA. After that drug, falling down could cause serious injury because you just don't clot at all. He was back in ER a short while later. Another lady decided that even though she was in the ICU, that since she got 4 units of blood and felt much better, it'd be okay for her to go ahead and leave. No, it's not okay. That's stupid. In nursing school, my labor and delivery teacher was covering contraceptives and demonstrated how to show patients how male contraceptives are used by putting them on our thumb. At the end of it, she emphasized, make sure you tell them that it doesn't actually go on their thumb, and that the way you put it on a thumb is how it should be placed on someone's manhood. I had a patient that was truly concerned that his cancer was contagious. He wanted to know how to keep his puppy from contracting it. He was literally more concerned about his tiny puppy getting cancer because of him than his own health. I'll never forget the joy and relief I saw in his eyes when I told him he could have all the puppy cuddles he wanted. For those of you wondering, the puppy cuddles were curative, of course. Aw man, that's super sweet. Dumb as heck, but still super sweet. For the purposes of surgery, vodka is not a clear liquid. I have been lied to by every one of my Russian homeopathic instructors, and I am going to demand a refund. Ooh, I have another one. I'm a nurse in general surgery. My patient had a note in her chat to not let her have any of the cups in the room, which I thought was strange. We've had other orders before for other patients saying they weren't allowed to have any metal utensils. The patient loved to swallow spoons and forks, but that's another story. But this was something new. I quickly found out why when I walked into her room for a morning report, and several cups of urine were sitting on her sink. Apparently, she was too lazy to get out of bed to pee, so she had her husband sneak in some more cups to conveniently pee in. No, peeing in a cup is not allowed. This happened multiple times after multiple talks with the patient, hence the order. Since I'm getting a lot of requests for the spoon dude, unfortunately it's not a very exciting story. He was a young gentleman in his late 20s and early 30s who came somewhat frequently to our floor for retrieving silverware from wherever it got stuck in his GI tract. Some people eat paper or laundry soap. His thing was swallowing cutlery. Once he downed several knife handles. How did he get the handles off? What drew him to these particular knives? After he ate one, what did it feel like to continue swallowing the others? So many questions. All meals were supervised for his visits. The catheter in your wang makes it feel like you have to pee, but you don't, it does it for you. No, don't just pull it out, you'll shred your bladder and seriously regret it. You're screaming right now because you're trying to pull out your catheter, please stop. No, don't throw your pee bag at me, you'll be arrested for assault. Sincerely, hospital security. A few years ago, I was taking care of a woman from a rural part of our state. She had just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and it wasn't looking good. Her husband was kind of keeping his distance from her. As I was doing something in the corner of the room, he came up to me and whispered, "I can still kiss her, right?" I then had to explain that cancer is indeed not contagious and he won't catch her cancer. It was kind of heartbreaking. Oh man. Number 1. Soda has sugar. I had a diabetic man who didn't realize this. I just don't understand how it was even possible to not know this as a grown adult. He was a completely normal person otherwise, which is why it had me asking, WTF? Number 2. Pouring Lysol on your diabetic foot ulcer won't keep it from getting infected. Number 3. When we said clear liquids only, like Jell-O, water and popsicles, we did not mean that you should convince your mother to blend you some McDonald's burgers and fries so you can drink that through a straw. Number 4. Unless you've already done it at least once before, pushing a baby out of your hoo-ha will neither be a pleasant nor quick experience. Had a couple that had been trying to get pregnant for over a year without success. Turns out they did the deed once and were waiting. Per our professor, she was counseling a couple and was starting to consider doing fertility tests before it came out that the couple were using protection every single time. Probably to all our benefit. Yeah, that's like a non-lethal Darwin Award. When you were told not to eat 12 hours prior to surgery, it wasn't a polite suggestion. We had a patient coming in who we told not to eat or drink anything, even water. So he drank Gatorade since we told him he couldn't have water. I worked in an ER and saw this more than once. Last case, parents brought their child in for surgery, let her eat a full breakfast because she was hungry. She vomited aspirated bacon and eggs and ended up in the ICU on a ventilator so they could irrigate all the food out of her lungs. How did the parents react? Were they shocked or was it more like, yeah, we done messed up? They were devastated. They realized they'd made a horrible mistake. It's easy to blame them, but honestly the average person doesn't fully grasp how dangerous surgery actually is. With the county corollary of, no, you can't smoke crystal just before surgery. I bet being an anesthesiologist is a great time. Sir, do you want to wake up halfway through your surgery? Please frickin' listen to me. I shouldn't be surprised, but the amount of people who just don't pay any attention to the medical professionals caring for them is mind-boggling, from the junkies to the idiots who believe they're homeopaths and think they know more after one bullcrap article. An executive came in once complaining of bumps on her tongue. She was worried they might be cancer. I got to write my favorite encounter note thus far in my career. Complaint, bumps on tongue, asymptomatic, exam, taste buds, assessment, taste buds, plan, reassure. I'm a medical student, and earlier this year I was taking a history from a patient during a bedside tutorial where a senior doctor takes a group of us to see a patient together. I was speaking to this man about his symptoms and used the correct word for male organ. Begins with a P, to which he gave me a confused look. I said it again and he still didn't know what I was talking about. I ended up having to ask him if he had any pain in his Johnson while peeing in front of my classmates and my tutor. Keep in mind that this guy was in his 40s. I don't work in a medical profession, but I do work in another place where terrible diseases run rampant and staff spend every waking moment fighting them off. A school. There was nothing more bizarre than explaining germ theory to a teacher. She honestly didn't believe that such a thing could exist. She sincerely believed that sicknesses were caused by negative energy and bad auras, and insisted that it was fundamentally impossible for something as small as a germ to harm something as large as a human body, if something that small could even be alive in the first place. She spouted off something about how a creature that small would be incapable of living for more than a few seconds because energy can only get so small, and a germ, she did finger quotes, could only hold energy to live for 1 or 2 seconds at most. These are the people educating your kids. For everyone asking what she taught, grades 1 to 3. Not exactly the kind of place I'd worry about her voodoo even needing to be brought up, but it shook my faith in her ability to be objective about other things, so I'm still uncertain. I mean, imagine if she was convincing an entire class of 3rd graders that they do not need to wash their hands. Caring for a woman in her 80s, I had to explain to her that you don't pee out of your hoo-ha. There is, in fact, another hole. I'm a veterinarian and I don't understand owners sometimes. I work at a clinic of a vet who's also a private animal nutritionist, so sometimes we do house calls for special cases. Client Bob's dog isn't eating well and he has no clue why. I go over and ask him to show me his feeding routine for his dog. He fills a bowl with kibble and the dog seems super excited to eat. I crap you not, he then goes over to the fridge, takes out the ketchup and drenches the kibble with ketchup. By this point, my jaw is hanging open in shock, and I can see that the dog has suddenly lost its enthusiasm for the meal. I ask Bob politely what he's doing, and he tells me that his entire family has ketchup on every meal. I then spend the next 15 minutes explaining to him that his dog may not like ketchup on its food. Now the dog eats great, and apparently I'm a miracle worker. I work at a vet clinic on weekends, and the amount of junk people feed their pets on a regular basis is astounding. I kid you not, we had a lady board her dog with us for the weekend. She bought toys, treats, bedding, even though we have our own and prefer to use that in case theirs is damaged or lost, but no food. Not a problem, we have food here and we even have tricks to make them eat, like putting some canned ID with their food. She gives our receptionist $40 and says, "Here's the money for his chicken McNuggets, he likes those, feed him 10 pieces a day." The receptionist flat out told this woman no and even bought the vet out to explain why we would not do that at our facility. I totally thought that the story was going to be dog won't eat kibble, owner doesn't understand why, turns out dog has been eating 3-course meals with owner, but he hasn't eaten his food for days. That's actually not too far off from what I see sometimes. Family will feed their dog copious amounts of table scraps and then wonder why he never touches the dog food. And why he has pancreatitis. And now, back to human beings, folks. Sticking the blade of a steak knife in your butt won't cure your constipation. I really wish this was a joke. That just because you take medication that controls your ailments, it doesn't mean you don't have them anymore. I ask plenty of older people if they have any medical history and frequently get "no" as an answer, only to look at their med list and find out that they're on a dozen medications. Why do you take this blood pressure medication? Oh, because I used to have high blood pressure. Nope, not how it works. That yes, guys can be nurses too. I'm a guy and nurse. No, I'm not a doctor. Yes, maybe I should have been a doctor instead. Or maybe a woman should be a doctor instead if she likes it more. Paramedic here. I had to tell a 19-year-old that she needed to change her tampon more than once a month. She was in septic shock, by the way. I'm a guy. Even I know you've got to change that crap out.
My sister is an ER doctor in Chicago. She once had to explain to a Mormon couple on their wedding night how to do the deed. The 19-year-old man had taken his 18-year-old bride into the ER, convinced his wife didn't have a hoo-ha. She also had to tell a mother of 4 that giving your children a heavy dose of vodka did not kill the bacteria in their bodies when they got colds. She also had to report that, obviously. She found a very frightened 23-year-old girl who came into the ER very afraid because she had found a growth in her crotch. It was her pleasure button. When my sister was asking her how she had never noticed it before, the girl responded, "My mom told me that if I touched my area, that the devil would get me." The girl had lived for 23 years without ever touching or seeing her own hoo-ha. I guess when she would wipe, she would just blot the outside quickly or something? A female patient came in and told the doctor that she'd been bleeding every month down there, thinking it had something to do with the birth of her daughter. Yeah, I can't emphasize enough the importance of teaching this stuff in schools. 2 things. 1 is to take all the medication even if you feel better at day 3. And 2, you do not give your kid the leftover medication from part 1 when he has the same symptoms a week later. Wanting someone to make you a cup of tea is not a good reason to call an ambulance. For everyone asking, yes, I made the tea. After a half-hour blue light run, might as well. Left to my own devices, I wouldn't have made that tea. I was a student at the time and was told to do so by my mentor. In the UK, social care is part of our remit, so it kind of makes sense. I work in a hospital. I was getting some history from this lady when she told me she was allergic to epinephrine, i.e. adrenaline. You know, the stuff in EpiPens that you give to people when they have an allergic reaction to stop anaphylaxis reaction. So I asked her what reaction she had last time she was given epinephrine, and she told me that it made her heart race and she couldn't settle down. Had to explain to her that that means it worked. People who've outrun the cops. How did you do it? Don't know if this counts, but my friend and I were busted for being 19 and 20 and drinking at a party. Everyone ran, but I hid and they ended up never finding me. I spent an entire 7 hours pretzeling in a woven basket in a closet, wide awake and slowly sobering. The scariest part was when they started searching said closet right after the bust and the cop moved clothes from above my head to reveal my hair and still didn't see me. Good times. Got to love the differences between the US and the UK. Busted for drinking at 19 and 20 in a private residence. I was a baby-faced 15-year-old drinking a pint in a pub. Police officer came in, told me to finish my pint and go home. They let you finish for the greater good. The greater good. The greater good. There were a lot of people and I was faster than 50% of them. Just like my zombie apocalypse plan. The benefit of smoking green herb in a forest and getting caught is that you're in a forest. We just took off. Hard to catch up when there's all kinds of crap to avoid. Personally, I don't rate my survival odds as being very high running through a forest at night while high on green herb, but I'm glad it worked for you. Hanging out at a friend's house when my mum texts me to inform me that my girlfriend is on her way back from college to surprise me. My girlfriend hated the dude I was hanging out with, so I didn't tell her I was there and recently told her I was home. I jump in the car and started flying home on a road that I should definitely not be flying on. As God fated, I pass a cop and I see him hit his brakes in my rear view. I instinctively floor it over the hill, pull into a parking lot and cut my lights off. Nighttime. Few seconds pass and I see him fly by with his wee-woos on. With no time to spare, I pull back out soon after and I finish flying home. Run inside, jerk my clothes off, lay on the couch, turn on the TV, and she knocks on the door not 5 seconds later. Mission accomplished. Wow, your mum is pretty fantastic for giving you a heads up. Mine would have thrown me under the bus immediately. She's a better wingman than my little brother. When I was younger, I was dating a girl at work. I had faked sick and called in on a Friday to go to a party, and for reasons I no longer remember 16 years after the fact, I didn't tell the girl. So I'm at the party and get a call from my buddy who tells me the girl heard I was sick and was on the way to my house to take care of me and bring soup. I rushed home and my little brother was the only one there, so I tell him, "Look, this girl is going to be here any minute and she thinks I'm sick, so just roll with it, okay?" I heard the doorbell from my room and prepared to put on my sick act. After laying in bed for 20 minutes, I go upstairs to see what's going on. I ask my brother what happened and he said, "I just told her you were sick, so go away." On my way to a concert on a motorcycle, I was kinda racing on another bike up the highway. Went past a state boy at about 100 miles per hour and jumped off the next exit, the correct exit for the concert. Basically, I was able to get past the line of traffic into the event and scoot around a gate that was closed by riding on the footpath. Made my way to an area where there was literally 100+ bikers. Ditched my helmet, removed the jacket, and sat on a picnic table while they went around and around looking for me. So not so much outran, but outplayed. Thankfully, they never got close enough to read my plate. I was leaving town, heading out into the country on my Triumph, probably cruising at around 80. Past a sheriff sitting on his little gravel drive. I figured, screw it, immediately downshifted and slammed the throttle open. By the time he hits his lights, I'm doing like 120 and climbing, and he must have figured out it wasn't worth the time because he just shut them back off. Didn't even shift out of park, I don't think. On foot versus a cop car. Ran halfway into a residential block through backyards, aware that they saw which direction I went. Once they were out of sight, I doubled back and ran half into the block in the opposite direction. Sat quietly in a bush. They circled a few times and left that block. I didn't do anything, just ran when a cop car drove by. I was a bored kid. My two buddies and I used to walk to a gas station at night when we were younger because they were 24/7 and sold huge burritos for $1. One of us was strangely afraid of the cops. One night we're walking and he sees a cop driving by and he immediately takes off in a sprint and hops a fence, leaving us awkwardly sitting out there with our burritos. The cop stops and was like, We get our friend to come back and apologize for being weird. Cop tells him he's a strange kid and circles the block a few more times to make sure we get home okay. I remember being like 17 and a group of us went rabbit hunting at night. We would basically ride around the cane fields and shoot rabbits. We would be drinking and stuff, and considering there wasn't crap else to do, it's what we did. So we finish up our hunt and we're exiting the cane fields onto the main highway. It would take us about 10 minutes to get back to my friend's house, and considering there was like 8 of us in a single cab Chevy, a few were riding on the bed of the truck. We jump onto the highway and make it about a mile when a cop turns his lights on. My buddy immediately pulls over and the rest of us are hiding our booze. As soon as the truck stops, one of my friends jumps out the back of the truck, drives into the bayou, crosses it, and takes off running. The thing is that the cop was a friend of ours. He had graduated the year before and recognized the truck, knew what we were doing, and wanted to mess with us and see how many we killed. I didn't hear from my buddy that jumped out the back of the truck until next afternoon, when I asked him why he did that. He said it was because he had half a joint in his pocket. This was before pagers or cell phones were a thing, thus the delay in communication. Running into a woods from a bonfire party. Knew previously from running into the woods where the barbed wire fence was and how to get through it. The cop in the dark did not. He was 15 feet behind me, then 100 feet behind me real fast. Wasn't worth giving me the MIP, so he turned back after that. Yee-haw. If he had seen my face, I wouldn't have run. With my car, among everyone else's sitting there, I would have felt way too paranoid driving later. Oh, that sounds rough to be that cop. Maybe he wasn't so much giving up the chase as going to attend to his wounds. We escaped by running. Me and my friends who were on the cross-country team, we casually ran 2 miles away. We were drinking in a park. Once we took off, the cops gave chase for about 100 yards and figured, screw it. It wasn't exactly a badass escape, but it was funny as heck. I'm imagining the cops chasing you during a cross-country meet and them getting really exhausted. In a town with a small police force. Hid, then placed an anonymous call tipping the police off that we were back at the scene of the crime, so the officers following us would return there. I've silently dipped out of a group as the cops were fast approaching, but never had to actually outrun them. There's some telltale signs at a party the cops are going to be called within a half hour in all likelihood. When the beer runs out, when the furniture gets lit on fire, potato cannon fired at vehicles, someone dives out of a window to not be seen until the next week, axe-throwing contests and sword fighting while they let the pigs out in a suburban neighborhood down the street from the high school. Senior year of high school, the night before Halloween. My friend dressed as a banana and I dressed as a gorilla. I was going to chase him around campus during school on Halloween, so we decided to go for a quick test run around the neighborhood late at night. We ran around and the banana costume we made was holding up real nicely. We saw a car turning around at a cul-de-sac, so we decided to run past it and see the driver's reaction. About 20 feet away from it, we realized it was a cop car. We were out past curfew, and the cops really do nab you for that here. So we stopped in our tracks and book it for the nearest park. Cop follows. My friend, a cross-country runner, took off ahead of me in his banana suit far into the park, into a trail deep into the neighborhood. I, a chubby dude in a gorilla suit, was wheezing when I got to the park. There were some trees that were about as wide as me, so I take cover behind one of them.
The cop shines his searchlight around, and I'm terrified he can see a piece of my suit sticking out from the tree. After what seems like an eternity, the cop finally turns off his light and leaves. Phew. My time to shine. I was 17 and dumb and on my way to a meeting a few towns over. Where I live is so flat that you can watch your dog run away for 3 days, so there are often long stretches of road in an open field. I was turning left onto a 2-lane highway when I saw these 2 cars blow past me, going the direction I was going, at least 90 miles per hour. I said, well, let's make this a convoy. I got up to about 120 to catch them up, and I was about with them when I saw a semi-truck coming in the opposite direction. I thought to myself, how boned would I be if there was a cop driving behind that semi? Sure as God's got sandals, there was a cop driving behind the semi. The first 2 cars passed, and I just saw his lights come on as I passed him. I thought, oh frick. Reckless OP, jail, I'm going to lose my license, I'm screwed. I start slowing down and reach into my wallet for my license when I see a house coming up on my right side on a small side street. There was a house and a 2-car garage off to the side. I slammed on my brakes and took the turn, and I pulled right into this perfect stranger's open garage like I own the place. I get out, shaking because I'm not out of the woods yet. I walk out of the garage and up to the front door of the house and knock. An old lady answers, and I tell her I'm here to work on my car and asked if Jack was home. All BS. She said, no, I'm sorry. I profusely apologized and turned around. Just then, I saw the cop fly past the house in hot pursuit of the other 2 cars. I got back into my car and took the back roads for the rest of the trip. I've beaten them several times. One of those times was in a bad neighborhood. As soon as he swung on me, I pulled into the first driveway and went to the door and knocked. I told the person that answered the door that the cop coming down the road was going to pull me over for speeding, that I had a suspended driver's license and would give them $20 to act like they knew me and to let me in. The cop stopped in front of the house, but the guy let me in. I paid the guy the $20, bull-crapped around for about 20 minutes watching the Wheel of Fortune with him and his wife, then went on my merry way. A relatively small downtown area was coming into town at 45 miles per hour, and the cop was coming the other way, directly at me. I was probably doing about 20 miles per hour over the limit, and he lit my butt up with a radar gun. He passed me, and I saw him turn around in my rearview mirror and flick on the lights. Generally, I would never run, but I was 18 and was one speeding ticket away from losing my license on points. I gunned it, got into town, and just weaved through a bunch of side streets until I was pretty sure I lost him. Here's the kicker, I'm pretty sure I lost him, and now I need to get back onto the main highway quickly. I'm sitting at a red light, waiting for the light to turn, and guess who goes right through the intersection in front of me? It was 1 a.m. or so not many cars on the road. My headlights shined right onto his car as he went in front of me, enough that I could see the guy. 18-year-old me crapped a brick. The cop kept going, and I gunned it to get onto the highway. I wonder if the cop had actually just given up on the chase at that point. From some of the other stories, it seems like they don't always pursue these things that rigorously. Story time. When I was about 14, there was this local store owner who treated the kids like crap, so kids started egging his business. So one night me and my overweight friend decided it's our turn to egg his place. Of course, that was the night he and his friends decided to hide in the store to catch any said eggers, and as soon as I let the first egg fly, they busted out the door after us. I've never seen a fat kid run as fast as my friend. He outran me, and I ran track. I still had a few eggs in my hands, so I started throwing them behind me and I could hear them cursing. I'd like to think that it slowed them down from catching us, but in reality, a bunch of 30-year-old, overweight, beer-drinking stoners weren't going to catch 2 14-year-old boys that were scared crapless and running on pure adrenaline. We put the distance between us and them quickly. So here it is, 1 a.m. in a small town, and at this point, we're about 10 blocks from the place we egged. We're on the business side of streets. I want to cross the road so we're in the houses side, where it would be a lot harder for the police to catch us. After hiding in some bushes for a bit and looking to make sure the coast is clear, we make our move. No sooner than we hit the street, we see a cop car like 5 blocks up drive from one street to the next, with a direct line from the police officer's view looking right at us. Suddenly, we heard the screech of his tires as he shot past us, and the sound of the car being revved up in reverse. But by this time, we're hopping back fences and covering blocks and blocks in a matter of minutes. At this point, I'd say we were on the run for about 30 minutes. So we wind up going 10 blocks in basically a C pattern to where we hop fences and cross yards, and we wind up by a house that has a huge weeping willow in front of it, has a direct view of the store we egged, and we can see the police lights, but the tree is so big we can't see past it. But it's the perfect place to hide under, to see what's going on. So we go under it, and we're probably about 7 blocks away, and take a look.
I crap you not, there were over a dozen police cars there. This was before the small town I lived in turned to crap, so the police routinely had nothing to do back then. So my friend is like, "Holy crap, look at all these police cars, we're screwed!" Meanwhile, I was saying out loud, "I can't believe there are this many police cars over one frickin' egg." My friend was panicking and I was actually just annoyed that they were making this big a deal out of it. So he says, "Let's just turn ourselves in," and I was like, "No frickin' way." If they were going to make such a big deal, I felt it was the principle that we had to make it back to his house and get away, even if it was just for that night. I said, "All we have to do is go 5 more blocks till we're out of sight of the police, and then cut across to where we're so far away they won't even think we made it that far." He says, "I don't know any of that area. I'm not getting bit by some dog running through backyards." I said, "Mother fricker, we already cut through like 20 backyards, and I'm pretty sure a dog is going to bark before we even get over a fence." I told him he can turn himself in, but I'm making a break for it. He decided to stay with me, so it took us another hour of quietly sneaking through backyards until we were enough distance away that we felt we could cross the main street where all the cops drove to make it back to his place. I considered it a personal victory that we outran half the police force in our town to make it back to his place, even though we turned ourselves in the morning. We left our bikes at the scene of the crime because we were idiots. I still look back at that time and smile. My one and only cop story. In 8th grade, my friend and I were both crammed in one of those electric razor scooters, heading home, and some lady started yelling at us. My friend slowed us down to hear what she was saying. Apparently, she was giving us a heads up that a cop was a block away. We got off the scooter and walked past the cop and went on our way. In conclusion, avoided confrontation altogether. Was with a friend running, suspecting that cops had been called, and we hid in a bush. I turned to my friend and say, "We need to go, but we have to walk." So we step out of the bush and not 20 seconds later a cop car drives straight past us, didn't even slow down. More often than not, if you act innocent, people will think that you're innocent. I train a lot. I run 5 to 6 days a week, 1 long day, usually 1 interval day, and 3 to 4 easy days. So I signed up for the local police fundraiser 5K, beat all the cops to the finish line. I told them they should add more speed work to their training if they want to catch me next year. I feel like this commenter might have taken the title in a little too abstract an interpretation, but I applaud him nonetheless. Now, settle in for a monster story to finish off the video with. Obligatory, not me, but my brother. The following is absolutely true. Gather round, Redditors, as I regale you with the tale of Bad Luck Mike and one of the times he got away from the man. I take you back to the halcyon days of 1990. Y2K was a decade away, and Prince had been hyping some big party he was planning in the works for 8 years at the time. Supposed to be a hell of a bash. Mike had committed a crime in our small suburb of Fort Worth, Texas. Frankly, the crime doesn't matter at this stage in the tale. Point is, he was on the run. Fortunately, our suburb had lots of creeks and storm drains and gullies crisscrossing through it. Every neighborhood was in the vicinity of a small brook of some sort. Also, fortunately, Mike was in the prime of his life. About 23 years old, 6'4", thin as a rail, with a hollow leg to hold all the beer he could steal on a given night, and the biggest swinging member in the town, whether anyone else knew it or not, and the unmitigated gall to go with it. So Mike was running over the hill and dale and crossing under a dim streetlight here and there on the run to one of his friends' place. But lo, a new problem arose. The baying of hounds in the distance. Johnny Law had called in the dogs. Now Mike started jumping fences, scaring little old ladies, and he finally took to where he would have the greatest chance of losing the fuzz. The creeks. Splashing through murky water all throughout our tiny burg, Mike tried to outfox the dogs until he finally came upon an idea and headed for the police station. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why in the frick would you go to the beehive while the bees are already on the hunt for you? But Mike had a plan. See, in Mike's mind, it made perfect sense to walk right by the cop shop. It's the last place anyone would ever think to look for him, and it had worked before. Mike once evaded arrest for a full week while the Fort Worth cops, in a bit of jurisdictional cooperation, tossed our town to bits searching for him. How? Why, he sat in the FWPD lobby and caught up on his reading, for free, from the library, while they searched for him high and low. I told you, unmitigated gall. So Mike finally came upon the police station and he sat back in a copse of trees making sure the coast was clear. He was covered in mud and muck, all manner of nastiness, and by the sounds of things, the dogs were getting closer. Heart in his throat, there was always the chance he would get seen by someone who was in the right place at the wrong time, Mike walked right by the PD and across the street, to the little laundromat where we washed our clothes every week. At the time, in our town, pretty much all activities stopped around 8 p.m. on the main drag. It was common to leave your front door unlocked and the keys in your car. There wasn't that much crime. So of course, there were no cameras to see Mike kick open the door of the laundromat, close it again behind him, and strip down to his aforementioned swinging eggplant. Using the change in his pockets, he washed and dried his clothes, and he gave himself a decent scrub in the laundromat restroom sink. An hour later, Mike was walking down the street minding his own business. Presently, the flashing lights behind him caused him to look back quizzically and give the universal hand gesture that says, "What did I do?" An incredibly corpulent cop jumped out of the vehicle looking like he'd had a few too many liters of cola, and with his light in Mike's face said, "I caught you." Another universally understood gesture from Mike, palms up, facing away from him, worry and innocence etched up on his face. "Whoa, Ed, what's up? I'm just going over to so-and-so's house. I'm not doing anything." Of course, Mike knew the cop. Mike knew all the cops. All of us did. We'd had them all in our house at some point in their careers, and it was well known that Mike made a cop's career interesting, starting from the age of 15 when he'd become a priest for a few hours in order to pull a truck heist. A tale for another day, gentle Redditors. Ed knew he'd been chasing Mike for the past hour. Mike knew it too, but Mike wasn't about to let Ed get a collar on him. "I've been after your butt for an hour, Mike. I've been chasing you through mud and crap, and goddammit, I got you." Wait, Ed, Mike reasoned. "You've been chasing me for an hour through mud and crap? Ed, I don't have a spot on me. I'm perfectly clean, man." "No, I know it was you, Mike." This goes back and forth for some minutes until Ed's on-duty supervisor pulled up, lights also flashing. He stepped out, looking like an acting double for Dan Aykroyd. "Okay, Mike, why are you giving us a hard time? Ed caught you. Let's go." "Look, Rick," Mike began. "Ed says he's been chasing me through the mud and crap. I'm literally clean." "Rick, I feel for you guys, but whoever it was y'all were chasing, it wasn't me." Having been presented with evidence that Mike was indeed clean and couldn't possibly have been running in creeks and streams for the past hour, Rick and Ed let Mike go. Everyone there knew Mike was guilty. As Mike walked off into the proverbial sunset, Ed and Rick knew they would get him eventually. When they finally did a couple of years later, Mike paid dearly for making them look like fools. Never worry, Mike is alive and well and continuing his anti-hero ways today. Gynecologists and OBs. What is the most mind-blowing thing a husband or boyfriend has said? Story from my internship. Checked a woman who was not progressing in labor and thought, "That's not a head." Sure enough, the baby was breech. She was a very tiny woman, and this was a large baby, so it was pretty clear that she would need a C-section. She was a recent immigrant from a small third-world country, didn't have a partner with her, and spoke absolutely no English. Unfortunately, nobody in the unit spoke her language. I tried my best to mime and explain what was happening and what we were recommending. She nodded yes, but I had a strong sense she didn't understand the explanation. We sent somebody down to housekeeping and the cafeteria, hoping we could find any hospital staff who could translate. Fortunately, we found someone able to translate. It turns out that she understood the baby was breech, but that she thought we would have to literally cut her open and kill her in order to save the baby. Her relief and joy when she finally understood what the plan was something I won't forget. The staff member from housekeeping was wonderful and stayed to support her until she went into the OR. My mum was a general practitioner. She once had a 15-year-old girl come in who had a pregnancy test show positive, but was adamant that she couldn't be pregnant. My mum confirmed the pregnancy, but the girl still refused to believe it was true. She went on to explain to my mum it was impossible for her to get pregnant because her boyfriend had told her that if she laid completely still during the deed, then she wasn't technically doing it and couldn't get pregnant. I was kind of refraining from commenting on any of these stories until I read this crap. This is the kind of loophole you use with the church, not with your doctor, and I can't stop laughing. I worked in a pharmacy and we noticed that a 16-year-old girl was coming back in to pick up her birth control exactly 2 weeks early every month. This was immediately flagged as strange because BC comes in a convenient package that makes it easy to keep track of the daily dose and birth control. It's not really a drug that people hustle to try to get as many pills as they can. Like Xanax, say. After a few months of this, the pharmacist confronted her and learned that every day she took her pill and her boyfriend did too. After Googling what happens when men take birth control, I'm morbidly curious as to how many months this happened for, because the boyfriend in question was probably undergoing some interesting changes as a result. When my wife was delivering our third child, a VBAC, I asked the doctor as a joke, "Can I be the one who chews the umbilical cord in half?" And he looked at me with a distant look and said, "Yeah, I guess." After several complications and several hours, a beautiful girl was in the world and the doctor said, "Okay, Daddy, get down on the floor and chew this cord in two if you're ready." Yeah, I didn't do it. I'm a nurse and helped deliver this girl's first baby. I was still in school at the time. She was like 19, I think. The father, who was obviously much older, was also in the room. After the baby was born, everyone was all excited and emotional, except for the father, who was just like, and shrugged it off. I worked in a diagnostic center. The gynecologist refers a patient for a hoo-ha ultrasound to find out why she's having fertility issues. The techie inserts the probe, woman flinches in pain, the tech asks if it hurts during adult fun times. The woman explains her husband doesn't insert it into the hoo-ha. No, here, while pointing to her belly button. The tech came out red-faced. She had to call the doctor and explain why the patient was having trouble getting pregnant. This happened twice at this clinic. Twice. ER nurse here had a 19-year-old woman come in for abdominal pain. She had 2 kids and was pregnant again. She said she was not happy to be pregnant again, but she didn't want to break up with her boyfriend. I thought the boyfriend may have been abusive or not letting her use birth control or something, so I closed the door and asked her some questions. Turns out she didn't know that banging caused babies. Her life skills class consisted of get boyfriend/married and the babies arrive, with no other details, so she thought once you had a boyfriend, babies were automatic and doing the deed was just a fun thing to do. We had a long talk. I'm not an OB, but work at an L&D hospital. In a note for our patient, there was one from a previous office visit that said, "Chief complaint, husband concerned about wife's weight gain during pregnancy." She was actually under the weight she needed to be at during that time. Seeing Mum back in the office for her 2-week follow-up after delivery to remove stitches. She had a tear that needed repair, only to find out that the stitches were gone. Turns out hubby took them out because they were bothering him when they were getting intimate. My mother is an OB Gyn. She did a manual hoo-ha exam for a woman, and the husband asked her with an angry tone of voice if there was any other way of doing the exam besides her using her fingers, because he didn't like her putting fingers in his wife. Not an OB, but when I was in med school, I was seeing a pregnant teen who was convinced she couldn't be pregnant. I asked if she was getting intimate with anyone, and she said yes. I asked if she used any kind of contraception, and she said no. However, she said that her boyfriend told her he couldn't get pregnant because he got kicked in the balls. A lot. Not an OB, but I work in an ER, and we had a 22-year-old woman come in a while back. I asked her what she was there for, and she said, "I found a hole." Like an abscess? I found a hole. Okay, is it a wound? Does it hurt? No, it's just a hole. It's a black hole. I 100% didn't understand what she was talking about and knew that I wouldn't get any more info from her at the check-in desk, so I gave her the bracelet and sent her to the triage nurse who had the same conversation with her. She didn't specify anything beyond, "Look, it's just a hole." It was her hoo-ha. I can't… What? 22? How? How did this person get this far? There are so many things that should have happened in her life to enlighten her as to the nature of her anatomy. My goodness. Growing up, my mother was very strict and religious, and girls were forbidden from looking or talking about down there. Could be a similar situation? I was working with a girl who hadn't been married very long, and who hadn't had a period since the one right before her wedding. She had told her older sister, and she had told her she needed to find out if she was pregnant. So she went to the doc, and it was confirmed that she was. She pulls me in the back room so no one else can hear, and she tells me, and I tell her congratulations. She says she has a question for me. She's peeing just fine now, but how will she pee when the baby gets bigger? Won't it block the urine? We worked in a library. I went right out to the stacks and got her a book on anatomy and another on pregnancy. I found the pages on the genitourinary system, and we sat in the break room while I read the one for females with her and explained it like it was a storybook. I was so furious that no one had told her a damned thing. On my OB rotation, husband said, "Holy crap," as the baby crowned, vagaled, passed out and hit his head on the bedside table on his way down, and had to be admitted to the same hospital his wife was having the baby at. She ended up getting discharged before he did. I definitely gave a story to the nurse who was taking care of my wife and I after our second kid.
Having been going through labor all day, only being on liquids, and not giving birth till almost 9 at night. We were relaxing, relative term, with the nurse holding the baby when I turned to ask the nurse a question. She pauses, turns away, turns back to me, and responds with, "Not anytime soon." Disappointed, I tried to ask for more specifics, because I'd casually asked, "When can my wife have snacks?" And that was a pretty nondescript answer for someone who hadn't eaten in 12 hours. Turns out she thought I was asking when my wife and I can have adult fun times together again. After a good laugh, the correct answer was a couple of hours. I can't imagine what was going through her head before the clarification. Work in IM, but a patient's partner not wanting us to reveal an HIV diagnosis to a patient was definitely a low point for me, though where I work it's probably a stretch to even call that surprising. Back in my ER days, a young teenage patient came in with pregnancy-type symptoms. Of course, pregnancy test was positive and appeared utterly shocked she was pregnant. I asked her if she was intimate with a partner. Yes. Do you use protection? No. Because? No. She still seemed surprised this had happened to her. Mom is an ob-gyn. She called a patient over to tell us she was HIV positive. The patient said, "I knew it," to which my mom asked how and why. Turns out the husband had been HIV positive for years, and they'd decided never to speak about it and have unprotected fun times for 5 years. This is what it costs to shirk responsibility and look the other way. In other words, idiot tax. Last month, a dad asked one of our OBs for an extra stitch during his wife's repair after delivery. Her immediate response was, "Exactly how small do you need it to be, sir?" Fricking legend on our unit now. Spread this so it can become the standard response to this all-too-common statement. I'm not an OB or GYN, however I am a flight medic who has delivered 3 babies. I'll never forget any of them. The second baby I delivered was about 5 weeks early, roadside, in East Jesus nowhere. The family had gone camping in the desert and Mum went into labor. By the time we arrived, there was no turning back and baby's head was visible. Mum was sort of squatting with her forearms on the middle row of seats in a van and her booty was aimed out the door. She was clothed in a loose dress. Just as she was pushing the head out, Dad said, Wait, we might get blood on the floor." Mum rounded on him with the biggest death glare and said, "Frick your mum's van." That became a unit motto. Yeah, frick your mum's van, silly dude. Your wife is delivering your baby. If your mum asks you to reupholster her vehicle hot on the heels of this, she's officially a few Fruit Loops short of a bowl. Sister is a nurse in the mum/baby unit who will also work in labor and delivery. One dad asked for a C-section so her hoo-ha wouldn't be ruined. Another dad asking for her to be stitched up extra tight after the delivery. Another dad that couldn't seem to keep his clothes on during their entire stay. The nurses had to have multiple conversations with him to keep his clothes on. He just kept stripping and walking around, like he'd go out to the coffee station in the hall with only his tidy-whities on, and he'd be buck nude in the hospital room. We had to ask him to wear pants and a shirt when in the hall, and at minimum pants in the hospital room. No, he wasn't even trying to do the deed with her. Not a physician, but I do work in obstetrics. We had a code OB called on the overhead, which means a delivery is happening elsewhere in the hospital, and the team needs to get there stat. A woman's husband was worried about getting a parking ticket, so figured he would park in one of the massive parking garages and then walk up to the door as she's literally giving birth. They obviously didn't make it, and she delivered in the car. They were extremely religious, and to prevent her body from being exposed to what could potentially be a male doctor, they kept her pants on the whole time. Baby, placenta, and all were just chilling in this woman's pants. It was horrifying. Baby and mum were okay in the end. Dad is a 30-plus year OB and gynecologist, now retired. He tells a story of a hyper-religious couple, Muslim, who came in about difficulty getting pregnant. He examined the woman alone and discovered that she was actually an intersex person. Male gonads, undistended, no uterus, normal hoo-ha. The woman was mortified to learn this at 18. She feared her husband would be violent, believing he had been being gay by doing the deed with her. My dad gave her the option to call the police or ask for help. He and the nurses gave her phone numbers for counseling and offered discretion when talking to the spouse. She declined everything and asked that they tell the husband together. The man was super upset and they eventually left the office, both in tears. Dad never saw her again and wonders what happened. Multiple people are asking the question, how did she not recognize something was wrong when she missed her period for multiple years? I'd asked this question myself to my dad as well. The answer, if I recall correctly, was that she did experience mild and intermittent menstruation-like symptoms, cramps, bleeding, etc., but they were very far apart and in hindsight completely unrelated to actual menstruation. She was from a rural community and never sought medical attention due to, who knows, money, fear, and the fact that she was otherwise completely healthy, I presume. I remember him saying that the marriage was arranged, and I'm sure her side of the fam were probably apprehensive about fertility issues. These are tricky situations. My grandpa was a surgeon, private practice, and in the army. Toward the end of his life, we discussed some of the crazy things he did and saw. He told me he operated on a man with 2 tumors in his abdomen. Turned out to be fully developed ovaries. He had fully functioning gonads, no hoo-ha or tubes, etc. Grandpa told him the tumors were successfully removed. The human body is a crazy thing. Back in my OB rotation in med school, we had a pregnant woman who was super morbidly obese with a BMI in the 70s. During her prenatal visit, the resident was asking about her pregnancy history, past difficulty with fertility and conception, problems with the pregnancy so far, etc. Pretty standard stuff as I understand at the time. Husband then chimed in about the conception. Turns out they had no trouble conceiving. He then went into detail about how the conception went and blew my little inexperienced mind. Basically, the wife's mother and sister had to help with the conception by holding the wife's thighs out of the way enough so that he could get in to do the job. I still don't have words. Not anything a husband or boyfriend said, but still an interesting story. I once took care of a patient who had a baby as a virgin. She was a very religious woman who was saving her virginity for marriage. She told me she never met the right man and she was ready to have the baby as she was getting older. She was in her early 40s, so she had the IVF done and had a baby while also being a virgin. Not an OB-GYN, but a med student. In one of my rotations, I had an encounter with a father who wanted us to make his wife only reproduce male children by some drugs or procedure. Our head used to tell us that I can tell if it's a boy or girl by only seeing the expressions of the fathers and relatives in the clinical rounds. You're allowed to guess, my country. I missed 2 minutes ago when I didn't know any of this. Me too, anonymous Reddit user, me too. Although I'm glad to say that none of these medical facts have been a revelation to me, there have been some stories that have been uncomfortable for yours truly to read out loud. My dad is a doctor and his friend was an OB-GYN and was telling my dad a time when a couple came into his office and they were having difficulty having a child. They were trying for over a year to have a child, but the wife never got pregnant. Found out that the man and the woman came up in a very strict upbringing and the man was never putting his eggplant inside of her. He was basically rubbing his eggplant on top of her hoo-ha and would splooge across her belly. Then he would take his finger and smear his semen all over the top of her hoo-ha. My dad's friend had to explain how to do the deed to both of them and tell them what to do and how to do it. It was an awkward conversation. I just kept thinking, did they not ever watch adult flicks or have that talk with their parents? Have they never even seen stuff related to doing the deed ever? It was just a crazy story, and I wonder if they ever figured it out and actually eventually had kids or not. My friend told me that her OB-GYN friend told her that apparently a significant number of people try to get pregnant by doing it in the butt. Proper education on these things matters, people. Years ago, I knew a woman that wanted to get pregnant, but that wasn't happening. She told me that one problem was her husband insisting on turning her around at the end and finishing in her butt. Now, she knew that wasn't good for conception, but he didn't, and she couldn't explain it to him in a way that worked. Perhaps I'm just being naive, but things like this make me wonder if he really knew or was playing dumb with his wife so he didn't have to have kids. My doctor told me a story about a baby he delivered. It was the couple's 6th, and they were very observant Orthodox Jews, so when she called at 11 p.m. on Shabbat that labor had started, the husband couldn't drive them to the hospital himself. Although the doctor understood, he tried to help them understand how emergent the situation was because the delivery was going to be so fast. The doctor races to the hospital and waits. He waits 30 minutes. An hour. He's pacing the drop-off. Finally, 90 minutes later, a taxi screeches into the parking lot at 2 a.m. The doctor opens her door to see a baby crowning and the woman yelling and the driver yelling. The husband throws open his door and just sprints off into the parking lot yelling, does a full loop while the baby is born, and runs up as the nurses are wrapping the baby and getting mum and baby into a wheelchair. The doctor said, "What happened? Where did you go?" The dad, I just didn't know what to do." The poor guy was so hopped up on adrenaline that he just took off. Not a mind-blowing thing that was said, but still kind of funny.
When I was in medical school, I did my OB rotation on high-risk areas. Medical students were generally scared of these areas, so I was the only student with an awesome attending physician and got to do a lot. We called the attending on this service a random thought generator. If he thought something, he would say or act on it. We had one student that showed up on our service in active labor. She had had a very uneventful pregnancy and couldn't figure out why she was on our service, but hey, we'll take a normal patient. She arrived with perfect makeup, perfect hair, and she had the perfect epidural and was in no pain or distress. The attending looked at me and said that I'd be doing this delivery. Okay, I thought, no problem. Then he looked at the father and said, no, you'll deliver this one. The father got wide-eyed and the mother started laughing. He's an air traffic controller. I've never seen him panic before. The nurse took him to the sink, gave him a scrub brush, and had him start washing his hands. We turned back to the mum. Okay, push. 1, 2, 3, 10. Relax. We looked at the dad and he's still washing that same finger he started with. Okay, that's good enough. A delivery is by no means sterile. Put this and this and this on. Our attending didn't put women in stirrups, but would instead deliver straight onto the bed. He sat the dad on the bed with him on one side and me on the other, and the dad delivered his own healthy child. My mum taught labor and delivery. If the baby won't fit, it's too late for a C-section, so you break up the baby's shoulder so it can fit through. One of her students asked why they don't break the mum's hip instead. Not a doctor, but pregnant. I told my boyfriend we should make and freeze 1 to 2 months of meals before the birth, because we'd be too tired to cook. He looked at me knowingly and said, ah yes, like pureed fruits and vegetables, so we don't have to mash them ourselves. He literally thought you feed the baby food from day one. We're in our 30s, college educated, he has a huge, close extended family with lots of babies, and he knows I'm going to breastfeed. I guess he thought you do them both from day one? My ex-boyfriend is an OB-GYN. He got annoyed with me when I was having cramps and said because he was an OB-GYN, he knew exactly what pain felt like and told me to get over it. Should have seen that as the first of many red flags. Obligatory, not an OB-GYN, but an operating room nurse. One gynecologist told us once about their gynecologist in training. We all knew him. He was a young, friendly, and good guy to work with. He was already married, father of 2 kids at the age of 25. This guy only had one negative aspect, and it was affecting his work dearly. He was extremely religious. This doesn't have to be negative, but his decision-making was based on his religion, and he often refused to offer contraceptives to his female patients, and he was reserved talking and explaining contraception methods to couples. It was against his religion. Eventually word got around with his superiors and they had to sit him down, explaining with him it's against the law to withhold any form of help and information. I was a receptionist and this woman came in crying. Her husband was behind her and she said, "Help, I'm bleeding." Long story short, we found out she was actively miscarrying in the lobby. She went to the back room for emergent care while a surgical room was prepped and she was, of course, crying and moaning and seemed to be in immense pain. The husband was stoic the whole time, nonplussed, not bothered in the least. He frowned at her moaning and said, "Will you knock it off? You're embarrassing me." He even had the nerve to ask us to watch his daughter in our break room while he went for a smoke. Had to have an emergency C-section and my husband was in there watching the whole thing over the sheet. After the baby was born, the doctor removed the placenta and my husband asked, "What is that?" Without missing a beat, the doctor turns to the second doctor assisting, holds it up and says, "I don't know. What is this?" All I could see at this point was my husband's face, and it was so worth it. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.